Hi guys and welcome to Relaxation Bedtime History. Tonight we slip into the restless glow of America's sin cities during the 1800s, where lamplight trembles on puddles, piano notes drift through open windows, and the street beneath your boots is less a proper road than a patient swamp of mud, ash, spit and horse traffic. You move toward the noise because that is what people do here. They are drawn by wages, by rumours, by loneliness, by curiosity, by the old human habit of believing that somewhere else life might finally become more interesting. It certainly does, although you probably will not survive this with your dignity fully intact. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, feel free to tell me your location and local time down in the comments. Now dim the lights and let your eyes adjust to a city that seems to glitter and stink at the same time. You arrive at dusk, which is the most flattering hour a place like this will ever get. The low sun catches the upper windows and turns them golden. Painted signs swing above storefronts. Music leaks from a saloon, thin at first, then fuller, as you come closer. Women in bright dresses stand in doorways talking with practiced ease. Men in dusty coats move past with shoulders set forward as if the whole street is a contest. Wagons rattle by. Somewhere nearby a hammer strikes metal in steady blows. Somewhere else a baby cries. This is the first thing that surprises you. The famous Sin City is not only vice, it is also laundry lines, grocery crates, church notices, stray dogs, and somebody trying to sweep a boardwalk that has frankly given up on cleanliness as a concept. In the popular imagination, these places are all cards, corsets, whiskey and wicked laughter. There is some truth there naturally. But the everyday reality is more crowded and more ordinary. In the 19th century, cities like New Orleans, San Francisco, St. Louis, Chicago, and the rougher districts of mining and cattle towns gained reputations for vice, because they gathered people quickly, often faster than decent housing, sanitation or law could keep up. That much is a solid historical fact. Sudden growth made room for gambling halls, brothels, dance houses and saloons. Yes, but also for carpenters, bakers, porters, washerwomen, printers, newsboys and 100 forms of respectable exhaustion. You feel this contradiction immediately. On one side of the street a barber pole turns. On the other, a gambling room glows behind curtains. Ahead, a butcher hoses blood into the gutter in a way that suggests no one has ever heard the phrase curb appeal. Behind you from an upstairs room, someone practices scales on a piano with the determination of a future genius and the current skill of a falling cabinet. The city is not neatly sorted into virtue and vice. It is all mixed together shoulder to shoulder like ingredients in a questionable stew. The street under your feet deserves its own mention because it is basically a character now. If you imagined elegant sidewalks and crisp urban geometry, I regret to inform you that your boots are sinking. Many 19th century American streets were unpaved or only partially improved, especially in fast-growing districts. Rain turns them into deep mud. Dry weather turns them into dust. Add horses, pigs, wagon wheels, food scraps and chamber pot contents, and the ground becomes less at surface than an active argument between nature and civilization. You step carefully, but not too carefully, because hesitation itself is suspicious. Around here, even your walk has to look as though you belong. Belonging is everything in a sin city. You do not need to be rich, but you do need a role. Gambler, clerk, seamstress, porter, widow, musician, cook, madam, preacher, policeman. Drifter is also a role, though not an especially comfortable one. The city watches for the uncertain. It notices who pauses too long, who looks up at second-floor windows, who clutches a bag as if it contains all earthly hope. You try not to do that, yet it does contain a good portion of your earthly hope, plus a comb, a collar, and perhaps one heel of bread growing steadily less inspiring by the hour. The buildings rise in mismatched rows. Some are brick and eager to look permanent. Others are wood and fully aware that a single fire could turn ambition into smoke before breakfast. Lamps are being lit. Gaslight, where available, gives a soft, steady glow that flatters faces and hides structural flaws. Candles and oil lamps do their best elsewhere, though they also add a constant whisper of fire hazard. Historians still argue whether the myth of the Western or urban sin city exaggerates vice compared with the quieter but equally rowdy realities of ordinary American towns, and the debate is worth remembering as you walk. Reputation tends to focus like a spotlight. It illuminates a few habits and leaves whole neighborhoods in shadow. Still, the city has earned part of its legend. You hear it in the sounds. Laughter rising from a saloon door, glass striking wood, a burst of fiddle music, a woman calling down to someone on the street, a newsboy shouting headlines with theatrical doom, hooves clopping on wet planks. From a distance comes the steamboat whistle or the train, depending on which kind of American ambition built this place. Transport matters deeply here. Ports, rail hubs and river cities attract transient populations, and transient populations create a market for quick pleasures, quick meals, quick kiss rooms, and quick mistakes. The smells arrive in layers. Coal smoke settles over everything like a heavy curtain. Beer and yeast drift from a brewery cart. Fresh bread appears from somewhere almost unfairly comforting, only to be overtaken by manure, cigar smoke, frying onions, damp wool, perfume, and the sharp medicinal sting of cheap disinfectant. You realise that what people later call glamour often depends on strategic memory. They remember the piano, not the drains. They remember the satin, not the socks drying over a stove. Even the clothing around you tells stories. Men wear city black frontier leather labour, denim polished boots, cracked boots, and hats that announce everything from confidence to collapse. Women's dresses range from practical calico to bright silk, designed to catch lamplight and attention in equal measure. A quirky little tidbit from the era is that some urban establishments scattered sawdust on floors not only to absorb spilled drink and mud, but also to swallow dirt, tobacco juice, and whatever else polite housekeeping had no energy left to name. It is not elegant, but it is efficient in the way a lot of 19th century life is efficient. You hide the mess rather than defeating it. You pass an alley and notice how quickly brightness fades. Here the city becomes quieter, though not safer. Laundry flaps overhead. Cats slip between barrels. A couple argues in low, exhausted voices. Someone coughs behind a thin wall. This is the other truth of the Sin City. Most people in it are tired. Not wicked in some operatic sense, just tired. They work all day, guard their pay search for dinner, and try to sleep through noise. Vice is partly entertainment, partly business, partly escape. But survival is the real occupation, and nearly everyone practices it. That is why the place feels so alive, not because it is one endless party, but because every block carries different ambitions stacked on top of one another. A preacher wants souls, a bartender wants customers, a landlord wants rent, a pickpocket wants your wallet, a widow wants work, a politician wants votes, a musician wants applause, a child wants supper. You move among them as twilight deepens into night and the city begins to reveal the face it prefers the world to remember. Windows brighten upstairs, curtain corners twitch. A woman laughs from a balcony with the exact tone of someone who has done this 12 times already tonight and still knows how to make it sound new. A man beside you mutters that this town can eat a person alive. He says it with admiration which feels correct somehow, because that is the strange pulse of America's 19th century sin cities. They are hungry places, but also hopeful ones. They consume money, innocence, and illusions at a lively pace, yet they also feed reinvention. You can vanish here, which is dangerous. You can also begin again, which is why so many keep arriving. So you keep walking boots, damp collar, slightly crooked senses filling with smoke and music and mud, and you understand that the famous wicked city is not just a carnival of bad decisions. It is a living organism made of labour, appetite, performance and need. It glitters at the edges, yes, but at its centre it is practical, crowded, and deeply human. And as the first lamps settle into the dark like watchful stars brought down to street level, you head farther in toward the people who came here for wages, for refuge, for risk, and for the old dangerous dream that a new city might make a new self. The deeper you move into the city, the more you notice that nearly everyone here seems to be arriving from somewhere else. Nobody looks fully settled. Even the men leaning with great confidence against a saloon rail have the slightly portable air of people who could be gone by sunrise. A trunk sits on one porch. A carpet bag rests beneath a boarding house bench. 2 boys carry rolled blankets under one arm and all their optimism under the other. You begin to understand that a so-called sin city is not just a place of temptation. It is a receiving station for human restlessness. You come here because people always do, not you specifically perhaps, although now that you are standing in the middle of it with lamplight on your sleeves and coal smoke in your hair, you can see the logic. You come because the farm has failed. You come because your husband died and left debts. You come because your brother wrote from St. Louis or Chicago or San Francisco saying there is work if you can bear the smell and the noise. You come because a river port or railroad town feels like the edge of the future, and the future, however grubby, sounds better than staying put. That migration is one of the mainstream truths behind 19th century American urban vice districts. These cities swelled with newcomers during decades of industrial growth, westward expansion, immigration and transport booms. Ports pulled in sailors and dock workers. Rail hubs gathered teamsters, mechanics, clerks and freight handlers. Mining and cattle towns brought in prospectors, drovers, cooks, laundresses, gamblers and all the businesses that orbit lonely men with pay in their pockets. Vice followed mobility like a faithful little shadow. Where people passed through, someone sold them drink, company, diversion or illusion. You start to pick out the categories though. Life here enjoys smudging its own labels. There are the young single men naturally full of wages they do not know how to save and loneliness they do not know how to name. They walk in packs, laugh too loudly and pretend the city is one long dare. There are widows who arrive with black dresses gone shiny at the elbows and a practical knowledge of how quickly respectability can collapse when rent is due. There are girls from farms who imagined city employment under bright shop windows and instead find sewing rooms, kitchens and suspicious offers. There are immigrants carrying languages the city does not yet pronounce kindly. There are veterans, drifters, runaways, failed clerks, successful frauds and earnest reformers who look faintly shocked by the material they have chosen to reform. You realise that reinvention is one of the city's great products. A person can become someone else here simply by speaking first and being believed. Back in a village or small town, everyone knows your father drank, your aunt gossiped, your sister eloped, and you once cried in school over a dead chicken. Here nobody knows anything unless you tell them, and even then they may not care. That freedom is intoxicating. It is also dangerous. If you can rename yourself, so can the man smiling at you from the faro table, and possibly he has renamed himself 6 times already. Some women come looking for ordinary work and do find it though. Ordinary in these cities is still exhausting. Laundry, domestic service, cigar making, seam work, shop counter, labour factory tasks, keeping borders, taking and mending. Some men arrive meaning to be respectable and remain so. If respectability can survive 12-hour days and tenement walls thin enough to hear your neighbour sneeze, pray, curse and propose marriage in one evening. Many do manage it. This matters. The famous vice districts were not populated entirely by villains, fallen doves and card sharps. Most residents were trying in various degrees of success to build a life. At the same time, the city thrives on people who are between lives. That is the key. The newly arrived are especially vulnerable because they do not know prices, customs, safe streets or dangerous smiles. A boarding house runner offers a room. A saloon keeper offers a meal on credit. A woman at a station suggests employment upstairs with a tone so smooth it should come with a warning label. You can feel how quickly chance becomes direction. One missed contact, one stolen purse, one bad fever, and the life you meant to start folds neatly into a very different one. There is a strange tenderness in that, and a sadness too. You meet a man from Ohio who says he came west for a clerkship that vanished before he arrived. You meet an Irish woman who found work in a laundry but sleeps in a room with 3 others and sends half her pay home. You pass a Chinese labourer walking back from a long shift, eyes lowered, because the city can be unkind in ways that are both casual and organised. You see a boy not yet 20 pretending to be older because wages prefer adulthood, while his face still holds that soft, unfinished look that says he should be asleep in a safer house. A quirky detail from some urban districts is that newcomers sometimes relied on highly specific bits of folk advice about survival in vice-ridden neighbourhoods. Things like which barber could be trusted to hold your satchel, which saloon served a free lunch worth eating, or which landlady would lock the front door against drunken disturbances after midnight. These tiny maps of trust mattered more than official guides. Cities often functioned through whispered recommendation long before they functioned through reliable governance. And governance, bless it, is often playing catch-up. Streets grow faster than police forces, housing grows faster than inspectors, jobs grow faster than wages improve. Historians still debate whether vice districts mainly trapped vulnerable newcomers, or whether many migrants used them more strategically, taking advantage of their networks, cheap lodging, and informal economies before moving into more stable lives. The answer is probably both, which is irritatingly human. Some people are swallowed, others learn the currents and swim. You notice too that men and women are judged differently for the same act of arrival. A young man coming alone to the city can be called ambitious. A young woman doing the same may be called risky before she has even unpacked. Moral suspicion hangs more heavily on some shoulders than others, yet women are not passive scenery in this migration. They choose, calculate, improvise. Some open boarding houses, some keep shops, some enter entertainment trades because the pay is better than stitching shirts until their eyesight frays like thread. Some become the practical centre of whole blocks, lending money, passing information, helping cousins, renting rooms, and knowing exactly who's in trouble before the police do. Children are here too, and perhaps that is what keeps puncturing the city's theatrical wickedness. A notorious district can still contain skipping ropes, apple peels, school slates, and a mother scrubbing cuffs in cold water while music from the dance hall leaks through the window. Whole families live within steps of vice because rent is lower there, or work is closer, or there is nowhere else. The city's moral geography is not nearly as tidy as later stories pretend. Sin does not occupy one district and decency another. They share walls. You pause near a corner, where a mission bell rings faintly over the clatter of wheels. Across from it, a saloon glows with invitation. That pairing feels almost too neat, as if the street itself is staging an argument for your benefit. But daily life is not an argument here. It is a scramble. The girl hurrying past with a parcel under her arm is not representing virtue or vice. She is late. The old man on the crate is not symbolizing decline, he is selling matches. The well-dressed fellow with the polished cane may be prosperous, or he may have pawned his blanket to achieve that polished cane. The city is full of surfaces, and surfaces are never the whole story. By now you can sense the invisible threads that pull people in. Wages, anonymity, transport rumour, desperation, appetite. Also hope, which is the most stubborn thread of all. Even the most battered newcomer usually carries some version of it. A better job, a safer room, a new husband, a vanished past, a little money put by. One winter survived, one chance taken. Sin cities sell pleasure. Yes, but they also sell possibility. And possibility is harder to resist because it can wear the face of virtue while leading you into all kinds of complicated arrangements. As the streets thicken with evening traffic, you realise that the city's reputation has made one mistake. It has mistaken the dramatic for the typical. The dramatic is easy to tell later. The knife fight, the painted dancer, the card cheat, the scandalous madam. But the typical is quieter. It is the seamstress counting coins, The porter looking for a bed, the widow reading a letter twice under weak light, the immigrant learning which streets to avoid, the boy with blistered heels deciding whether to spend his last coin on supper or shelter. These are the people who fill the city's lungs. The notorious district breathes because they have come, and you keep moving among them, feeling the crowd shift around you like a tide made of wool. Coats, skirt, hems, lunch pails, perfume and river damp, knowing that before long you will need a room, a meal, and some answer to the old urban question. Not how wicked is this city, but how exactly are you meant to live in it once you arrive. By the time the evening settles into full darkness, the question of where to sleep stops being philosophical and becomes painfully practical. The city may be full of music, money, and temptation, but none of that helps if you have nowhere to put your head. So you turn from the brighter doors and look for a boarding house, a lodging room, a cheap hotel, or any establishment with a sign that suggests shelter rather than ruin. In a sin city, these categories often overlap in excitingly disappointing ways. You find the building by its smell before you fully trust its appearance. There is cabbage somewhere. There is lamp oil. There is damp wood and old soap and the faint ghost of tobacco that no amount of open window seems able to defeat. A cat sits on the step with the expression of someone who has seen every human mistake and no longer wishes to comment. Inside, a hall runs narrow and dim toward a desk where a landlady or clerk studies you with the cool concentration of a customs officer guarding a small border. Here, first impressions matter almost as much as coin. If you look too poor, you're trouble. If you look too polished, you may be trouble in a better collar. Boarding houses were a central feature of 19th century urban life, and that is one of the most mainstream facts worth holding on to. In fast-growing American cities, especially in neighborhoods crowded with laborers, clerks, single women, and migrants' private family homes often took in lodgers to make ends meet. Purpose-built lodging houses, cheap hotels, and rooming houses also multiplied. In vice districts, they form the hidden skeleton of daily life. Everybody needs a bed, even if the bed is narrow, lumpy, and placed directly beside a wall, thin enough to pass for moral symbolism. You pay in advance if you can. That is safer for the house and somehow less humiliating for you. The room you're shown is up a staircase that complains at every step. Your candle or lamp catches the edges of wallpaper that has peeled itself into decorative defeat. The washstand leans a little. The pitcher is chipped. The window, if you are lucky enough to have one, looks onto an alley where someone is still arguing with great sincerity about either politics or a missing boot. The bed itself has a blanket, a quilt, perhaps a bolster, and the deeply unsettling aura of previous occupants. Privacy as a concept does not flourish here. In a better boarding house, you may have a room to yourself, though even then the walls are so thin that solitude feels mainly symbolic. In cheaper places, you share 2 beds to a room, sometimes more bodies than beds. In crowded districts, shift sleeping can happen, with one worker using a mattress by day and another by night, which is a rather efficient system if you are a landlord, and a less enchanting one if you're human. You had perhaps dreamed of the city as a place of personal reinvention. Instead, it is introducing you to communal breathing. You sit on the mattress and hear the whole house around you. A woman coughing next door, someone pouring water into a basin, footsteps overhead, a child laughing somewhere below. From the street comes a rolling wave of sound, wagon wheels, saloon, piano hooves, voices rising and falling. This is what sleep means here. Not silence, never silence, but negotiation. You do not drift off into peace. You wrestle yourself into unconsciousness while the city continues performing 3 feet from your skull. The boarding house table downstairs is often where social life gets sorted. Some houses provide meals, some do not. Some offer breakfast and supper in a common dining room where people watch one another over weak coffee and strong opinions. That shared table can be one of the few places newcomers learn the city's rules. Which factory is hiring? Which street floods? Which policeman takes bribes? Which grocer extends credit? Which bar to avoid if you value your watch? The room itself may be cramped, but the information is priceless. That is part of what makes boarding houses so important in these districts. They are not just places to sleep, they are job exchanges, rumour mills, moral theatres, surrogate families, and sometimes surveillance systems with wallpaper. Landladies in particular can become powerful figures. Some are kindly, some are strict, some are both, which is usually the most effective combination. They know who comes in late, who drinks too much, who receives letters, who is not paid, and who has the sort of smile that suggests future nonsense. In neighbourhoods where formal authority is inconsistent, domestic authority can become surprisingly formidable. You may notice the gender differences immediately. Respectable women's boarding houses often advertise rules, curfews, church expectations, and references. Men's lodgings can be looser in principle and rowdier in practice, though that does not necessarily make them more pleasant. A house full of male labourers after payday can produce an aroma and volume level that should probably be classified by federal law. Meanwhile, single working women in cities often depended on boarding arrangements to preserve both affordability and reputation. To live alone as a woman could provoke suspicion. To live under a matron's roof offered at least a paper shield against gossip, and gossip naturally is one of the utilities provided at no extra cost. There is also the matter of pests, because history is never content to let romance go unpunished. Bedbugs are a known urban misery in the 19th century, and fleas are not exactly rare guests either. You inspect the bedding with the wary concentration of someone diffusing a social bomb. Some travellers supposedly sprinkled herbs, tobacco or camphor in trunks or around bedding in hopes of discouraging insects, which is the sort of household optimism one admires even when it does not entirely work. A quirky tidbit from some lodging houses is that rope beds and straw mattresses could be tightened, aired or restuffed, though freshened did not always mean what you would like it to mean. You wash as best you can. That means a basin, a rag cold or lukewarm water, and a quick acceptance that cleanliness here is more aspiration than achieved state. Shared privies in yards or outbuildings serve multiple rooms, and nighttime trips to them are not pleasant. Chamber pots, though useful, are hardly glamorous companions. Historians still dispute how far urban Americans of the period tolerated such discomfort as normal, and how far they actively complained about it in ways later sources simply under-recorded. People can adapt to remarkable inconvenience, but adaptation is not the same as contentment. And then there are the sounds after midnight. This is when the boarding house becomes a kind of accidental orchestra. Doors opening, a drunk singing 2/3 of a song with painful conviction, whispered returns, someone being sick into a basin, a chair scraped across bare boards, the landlady's tread unmistakable and corrective. Outside the city never quite quits. In vice districts especially, the night shift is real. Barmaids, musicians, sex workers, policemen, teamsters, printers, bakers and watchmen keep different hours so the house does not sink into unified rest. It pulses, yet oddly enough it can also feel intimate. Shared hardship has a way of creating familiarity before friendship. By the second night you know the rhythm of your neighbour's cough. By the third you may borrow a match share, a newspaper trade, a warning, or speak to someone at breakfast whose life would never have touched yours in a smaller, tidier place. A boarding house draws together clerks and widows, seamstresses and sailors, couples in trouble, men on temporary jobs, girls starting shop work and old residents, one missed rent payment away from leaving. It is a compressed city within the city, and through those thin walls you begin to hear the emotional truth of these famous neighbourhoods. Not just laughter or vice, but longing, homesickness, worry, ambition, rehearsed under the breath. A young man reading a letter from home. A woman crying very quietly so the corridor will not hear. Someone counting coins once, then counting them again, as if arithmetic might improve under pressure. These places are crowded, but loneliness still fits perfectly. By the time you finally lie down, fully clothed or nearly so, because caution is a habit you learn quickly here, the mattress creaks its opinion of you. The blanket smells of starch wool and former weather. Streetlight or moonlight pushes through the curtain in a pale sliver. Down below a door shuts. Farther off, music drifts from a hall where people are still pretending the night is young and generous. You are tired enough now not to care whether the pillow's good. You close your eyes and feel the whole house breathing around you, a fragile stack of strangers balanced above mud noise, vice and hope. And in the morning, when the bell rings, or the hallway stirs, or the smell of coffee reaches your door with all the authority of a church summons, you will go downstairs and discover what this city feeds the people trying to live through it. Morning arrives without ceremony. No gentle birdsong, no peaceful stretch into the day. Just a steady layering of sound that builds until sleep becomes impossible to defend. Someone knocks a jug against a basin. A chair scrapes. A voice calls for hot water that will not arrive hot. From the street below comes the clatter of early wagons and the dull rhythm of boots already heading somewhere important. You open your eyes and remember where you are, which is always a slightly disappointing moment. The air in your room has cooled overnight, though not necessarily improved. You sit up, adjust your collar, and consider the idea of breakfast with cautious optimism. Hunger, after all, has a way of improving standards. Downstairs, the boarding house table is already half full. People eat quickly here. Meals are not social luxuries so much as necessary pauses between one form of labour and another. Breakfast in a place like this tends towards simplicity and repetition. Coffee is the centre of gravity, though it may be more aspiration than substance. In many 19th century cities, especially in cheaper districts, coffee could be stretched with chicory or other fillers to reduce cost. You sip it anyway, it is hot, it is bitter, and it performs its duty of waking you up. Bread appears sometimes fresh, sometimes yesterday's optimism reheated. There may be butter if fortune is smiling. There may be porridge eggs or fried scraps depending on the house and the price you paid. A widely accepted fact about urban diets in this era is that working-class meals were often heavy on starch and light on variety. Bread, potatoes, cheap cuts of meat, and whatever vegetables were affordable or available in season made up the bulk of daily eating. In port cities like New Orleans, seafood might appear more often. In inland industrial centres, preserved meats and grains dominated. Fresh produce was a treat, not a guarantee. You watch the others eat. A man with ink on his fingers wolfs down his meal as if time itself is chasing him. A young woman eats more slowly, perhaps out of habit, perhaps to make the moment last. Two labourers argue about wages while chewing with impressive determination. At the far end, someone reads a newspaper aloud, translating headlines into dramatic commentary for anyone willing to listen. The room hums with small urgencies. Outside the city, it is already feeding itself in a different way. Street vendors set up their trade early, offering pies, bread, fruit, or small portions of cooked food to passers-by who cannot or will not return home to eat. You step out after your meal and follow the smell of something frying. It leads you to a cart where a man flips cakes of batter onto a hot surface, the oil snapping in quiet protest. You buy one. It is greasy, slightly sweet, and entirely satisfying. Food in these districts often carries a certain ambiguity. You do not always know where it came from or how long it has been waiting. Meat pies might be made from yesterday's leftovers. Stews can conceal a great deal of culinary creativity. There is a long-standing joke that it is best not to ask too many questions, and you begin to see why. Still, people eat, and most of them manage to keep going, which is the practical measure of success. One unusual detail from the period is that some saloons offered free lunches to customers who bought drinks. These meals were not generous out of pure kindness. They were a clever strategy to encourage spending. A plate of bread, cheese, pickles, or cold cuts could keep a customer in the room longer, and a longer stay often meant more coins changing hands. You notice this when you pass a saloon with a sign promising food. Inside, a few early patrons are already leaning at the bar, their breakfast paired with something stronger than coffee. You hesitate at the door, not out of moral concern, but out of curiosity. The saloon feels different in daylight, less theatrical, more practical. Men eat standing up, talk in low voices, and glance occasionally at the clock. It is less a den of vice than a communal kitchen with alcohol as its centerpiece. You take a seat for a moment listening. Conversations range from work schedules to rumors about new arrivals, from complaints about prices to speculation about the weather. Life here is not always dramatic. Much of it is simply routine. Of course, not everyone can afford even this modest start to the day. Some skip breakfast, entirely saving their coins for rent or supper. Others rely on charity kitchens or mission houses that offer simple meals in exchange for attendance at a sermon. These spaces mix generosity with expectation. You eat, you listen, you nod. It is a transaction, though a gentler one than many in the city. There is also the matter of alcohol as part of daily consumption. It is easy to imagine drinking as purely recreational, but in the 19th century it often played a more complicated role. Water quality in growing cities could be unreliable, and beer or diluted spirits sometimes felt like safer options. That does not mean moderation always followed. The line between sustenance and excess is thin, especially in places where stress is constant and entertainment is close at hand. Observers of the time did not always agree on how much people drank or how central alcohol truly was to everyday life. Some accounts emphasize widespread consumption and its social impact. Others suggest that while drinking was common, many individuals maintained careful limits, especially those with steady work. The truth likely varies from street to street, house to house, person to person. You finish your cake and wipe your hands looking around at the morning crowd. A woman with a basket hurries past her steps, quick and purposeful. A boy balances a tray of newspapers, calling out headlines with a voice too young for such urgency. A pair of men unload crates from a wagon, their movements practiced and efficient. The city is fully awake now, and breakfast is already seeping into memory. As you walk, you notice how food connects different parts of this world. The boarding house table, the street cart, the saloon counter, the mission kitchen. Each offers a slightly different version of the same promise. Eat something, keep going, survive the day. It is not glamorous, but it is essential. You pass a bakery where fresh loaves are stacked behind the window, their smell warm and inviting. For a moment, the city feels almost gentle. Then a wagon splashes through a puddle and the illusion breaks with admirable enthusiasm. You step back just in time, adjusting your coat with the dignity of someone who has narrowly avoided disaster. Breakfast, you realize, is less about comfort and more about preparation. It is the first negotiation of the day. You take what is available, you pay what you can, and you move on. The real business of the city still waits, and it has little patience for anyone who lingers too long over a cup that was never very full to begin with. You turn toward the streets where work gathers, where people trade time for wages and energy for survival. The glow of the night has faded, replaced by the sharper light of day. Whatever the city promises after dark, it demands effort in the morning, and you are about to see just how much. By the time breakfast settles in your stomach, the city has shifted from suggestion to obligation. Night can afford a little mystery. Morning cannot. Now the streets fill with purpose, and even the most notorious district reveals something slightly inconvenient to its legend. Most people here are working. Not flirting in doorways, not cheating at cards, not composing scandal for future memoirs. Working, carrying, stitching, sweeping, hauling, selling, scrubbing, counting, hammering, waiting for wages that never seem to stretch quite as far as the week. You follow the current because cities always teach through motion. Men with lunch pails stride toward warehouses and yards. Women head for shops, kitchens, laundries and private homes. Boys dart between adults with baskets, bundles and messages. A few girls walk together with the fast, careful pace of those who must arrive on time and remain unnoticed, which is one of history's crueler little double tasks. The famous Sin City in daylight turns out to have the soul of a very busy workshop. This is easy to forget later, when stories focus on vice and leave labour in the background like an underpaid stagehand. Yet one of the clearest truths about 19th century American urban life is that long hours of work structured nearly everything. Industrialization, transport expansion, and service economies drew thousands into cities, and many of them labored 6 days a week for 10, 12, even 14 hours at a stretch. That reality forms the true backdrop to saloons, dance halls, and gambling rooms. People do not seek diversion in a vacuum. They seek it after carrying barrels since dawn. You pass a row of storefronts where clerks are already unbarring doors and sweeping thresholds. The sweeping is partly for cleanliness and partly for display, a way of announcing order against the city's constant threat of grime. Nearby, a seamstress shop has opened its shutters. Through the window you glimpse bent heads, moving fingers, and a room that already looks tired before the day has fully begun. Needle trades were notorious for low pay and eye-straining repetition. Fine dresses might shimmer under evening lamps, but somewhere before that there is always a woman hunched over seams, earning too little to admire her own handiwork. Farther on, the heavier work begins. Dockside, if this is a river or port city, men unload cargo with practiced force. In a rail centre freight, handlers and yard crews move amid noise and danger, where a single mistake can cost fingers' wages or both. In mining supply towns and cattle hubs, teamsters, blacksmiths, stable hands and warehouse labourers keep the machinery of expansion moving. The city's vices may get the songs, but labour gets the blisters. There is a particular look people wear when they cannot afford fragility. You see it everywhere. Women carrying wash tubs with wrists gone red from lye and water. Men with shoulders slightly forward from years of lifting. Children working errands with the solemn competence of the prematurely useful. Nobody performs hardship for your educational benefit. They are too busy managing it. One lesser-known feature of some vice districts is how closely ordinary trades clustered beside notorious businesses. A barber, a cobbler, a dressmaker, a printer, a pawnbroker, a lunchroom, a church mission, a saloon and a brothel might all sit within a block of one another. The geography of respectability was rarely neat. A laundress could scrub shirts for gamblers, a tailor could fit a preacher and a card shark in the same afternoon, and a grocer might extend credit to a family upstairs from a dance hall. Daily survival encouraged practical alliances more than moral tidiness. You begin to understand why people guard steady employment so fiercely. Without regular wages, everything unravels fast. Rent falls behind, meals shrink. Clothing wears out faster than it can be replaced. A single illness or injury can push someone from insecure respectability into open desperation. For women especially, the labour market is narrow and often poorly paid. Domestic service, laundry, sewing, shop work, food, preparation. Respectable occupations exist certainly, but respectability does not guarantee enough income to live on. Sometimes the city's darker trades are not chosen because they are glamorous. They are chosen because they pay in cash and do not ask for references from a minister. Contemporaries argued fiercely over this point. Reformers often described vice as a simple moral fall. Other observers, then and now, have suggested a harsher economic logic, one in which limited opportunities pushed many toward informal or stigmatized work. The question has never had a tidy answer. Character matters, circumstance matters, wages matter, gender matters, so does the price of a room when winter is coming and your employer has cut hours. You stop near a factory entrance just as a bell sounds and workers hurry inside. The faces passing you show all the shades of resignation focus and fatigue that modern office elevators manage less poetically. Here, though, the cost is written more plainly on the body. Hands chapped, cuffs frayed, boots repaired past dignity, hats brushed carefully, because a pride is cheaper than replacement and no less necessary. In the service trades, appearances matter almost as much as effort. Bartenders, barmaids, hotel clerks, waitresses, dressmakers and shopgirls all work under the eye of the customer, which means labour includes performance. You must look neat, pleasant, capable, unbothered. You must manage not only tasks but moods. In that sense, the glamorous and the respectable worlds are closer than they first appear. Emotional labour did not wait for a modern term to begin exhausting people. A small but telling oddity of the era is the importance of piecework in many urban trades. Seamstresses, cigar makers, and other workers were often paid by output rather than by hour. The idea sounds efficient until you picture the reality: endless concentration, constant speed, and the gnawing knowledge that every pause has a price. A woman sewing shirts late into the evening is not merely finishing a task. She is trying to turn minutes into coins, one stitch at a time. And then there are the jobs that exist because vice exists. Musicians, bouncers, card dealers, barbers attached to hotels, laundry services for brothels and saloons, delivery boys carrying bottles, food messages and secrets, carriage drivers who know which doors matter after midnight, police officers who patrol into fear or profit according to temperament and opportunity. Even reform depends on labour, with mission workers, matrons and lecturers trying to push back against the economy that vice has built. The notorious district is not a separate planet. It is a labour market with better lighting at night. Some researchers have pointed out that the line between respectable and disreputable work could blur in the eyes of outsiders. A dance hall performer, a saloon singer, a cigar girl, a waitress in a rough establishment, a boarding house keeper, a theatrical costume maker. To one observer, these are normal occupations. To another, they sit too close to temptation to remain morally clean. That ambiguity shaped real lives. Reputation could open doors or close them, and often the same job looked different, depending on who was doing the judging. You walk through a lane behind a row of businesses and find the city stripped of pretense. Empty crates, coal dust, aprons hung on nails, a cook taking 5 quiet minutes on an upturned barrel, 2 laundresses flexing their sore hands before going back inside. This is not the city of sensational headlines. This is the city that keeps the famous city fed dressed, heated, and upright. A scholar today might ask whether Americans later exaggerated the leisure side of these districts, because leisure is more dramatic to remember than labour. That seems likely. Nobody builds myths around repetitive strain and bookkeeping, even though both have changed more lives than roulette ever did. Still, the myths persist because nighttime is visible, and work often hides itself indoors or behind kitchens' counters, loading docks and washhouses. Yet the balance more matters. You cannot understand the saloon without the shift that ends at its door. You cannot understand the dance hall without the wage packet that makes one evening's escape possible. You cannot understand prostitution, gambling, or petty crime without noticing how many people around them are counting, serving, carrying, and enduring. Vice is not floating above the city. It is threaded through the same economy that sells bread and men's boots. As the afternoon light sharpens on brick, plank, and window glass, you feel the district settling into its daytime rhythm. A less romantic rhythm perhaps, but a more honest one. Here are the real engines of the place labour and appetite necessity, and display exhaustion, and the occasional stubborn wish for pleasure. By evening the lamps will soften all this again. Music will return, perfume will challenge the smell of horses, coins will slide across polished wood. But for now, in the plain, revealing light, you see the city as it spends most of its life. Not wicked first, but working first. And among those workers moving with purpose through streets that ask a great deal and forgive very little, are women whose daily calculations may be the most difficult of all. You notice them more clearly once you stop looking only at the loudest parts of the street. The city likes to advertise men. Men stride, boast, spit bargain, and take up emotional square footage as if they have rented it by the hour. Women, by contrast, are often moving with quieter precision, yet they are everywhere, on stoops behind counters, carrying baskets, lifting hems above the mud, hurrying to work, standing in doorways, watching from windows, negotiating with landlords, dodging remarks, assessing danger in a glance. If this city runs on labour and appetite, then women are managing a remarkable share of both. To walk these streets as a woman is to perform calculation almost without pause. You learn where the light falls and where it does not. You learn which block is lively enough to be safe and which is lively enough to be trouble. You learn how to keep your face composed, how to answer some men and ignore others, how to appear neither inviting nor frightened, which is an absurd little balancing act the world keeps demanding with a straight face. A man can wander and be curious. A woman wanders and is judged. That imbalance was built into everyday urban life in the 19th century. Women in American cities had fewer legal and economic freedoms than men, and their safety often depended on wages, kinship, reputation, and luck in proportions that shifted daily. Yet it would be a mistake to imagine them as passive figures drifting through a masculine landscape. In practice, women made households possible, businesses functional, and whole neighborhoods legible. They were workers, renters, landladies, shopkeepers, wives, widows, entertainers, healers, and survivors of an urban system that rarely made things easy. The first thing you notice is speed. Respectable women in public often move with purpose because purpose itself is a kind of shield. A basket in hand, a parcel under the arm, an apron, a work shawl, any visible sign that you belong to labour rather than leisure. The city reads surfaces quickly, so women learn to dress strategically, walk strategically, speak strategically. Even silence can be strategic, especially silence. Still, appearance is not just protection, it is also currency. A seamstress may have only one decent dress, but she keeps the collar clean. A boarding house keeper arranges her parlour to look more stable than her accounts. A shop girl pins a ribbon just so because customers respond to neatness and employers do too. In vice districts, the contrast grows sharper. Some women work hard to look plain and respectable. Others work equally hard to look dazzling. Both are forms of labour. Both are expensive in ways men rarely bother to notice. One well-established reality of the period is that women's work in cities was widespread and economically essential even when it was underpaid or publicly minimised. Domestic service employed large numbers. So did laundry, sewing, millinery, food service, boarding house management, small retail, and various factory jobs. Widowed or abandoned women often had little choice but to earn. Married women contributed too, sometimes openly, sometimes through endless unpaid domestic work that supported a husband's wages. The sentimental ideal of the woman at home, calm and sheltered, was always more available to the prosperous than to the poor. You pass a laundry yard and immediately understand why reform pamphlets sound so dramatic about urban hardship. Steam rises, arms move, water sloshes, linen is beaten, boiled, wrung, and hung with impressive violence. Laundry was brutal work, especially in neighbourhoods serving saloons, hotels, and brothels. It damaged skin, backs, lungs, and patience. Yet many women took it on because it could be done independently or semi-independently, with fewer moral questions than some alternatives and more immediate cash than others. Then there are the boarding house keepers who may be the unofficial queens of practical city life. A widow with a respectable parlour, a firm voice and a grip on household credit can exercise more day-to-day authority than many men in better hats. She decides who gets a room, who is behind on rent, who may bring visitors whose boots remain on the mat, and whose excuses are no longer interesting. More than one urban household depended on a woman who combined bookkeeping, cooking, discipline, diplomacy, and nerve into a single formidable personality. Some of the more colourful memoirs from the era describe women carrying hatpins long and sturdy enough to serve as defensive tools, and while the hatpin panic became exaggerated later, the broader point holds. Women adapted. They improvised forms of self-protection, escort networks, coded warnings, and social tactics for moving through risky streets. A shop girl might leave work with a friend. A prostitute might pay a cabman she trusted. A widow might cultivate good relations with the grocer, the policeman, and the toughest woman on the block, which frankly sounds wiser than most formal security systems. Of course, judgment follows women everywhere here. The line between respectable and suspect is narrow, and observers of the period had a terrible habit of drawing moral conclusions from clothing timing or simple presence in public space. A woman outdoors alone after dark might be working, visiting family, returning from service, performing on stage, heading to a sick neighbour, or trying to buy bread before shops closed. But many people preferred the faster street. Suspicion was cheap and widely available. And yet women do not merely endure the city, they shape it. You see it in market stalls run by women who haggle with cheerful ruthlessness. You see it in kitchens where cooks feed half a neighbourhood from dawn onward. You see it in the dance halls where hostesses and performers control the mood of the room more subtly than any man pounding the piano. You see it in churches and missions where female reformers organise aid instruction and surveillance in proportions that vary depending on the institution and the day. Women build networks because they must, and those networks carry information faster than any official notice. There is an especially interesting wrinkle in vice districts. Some women find forms of independence there that the more respectable city does not easily offer. Not comfort, not safety, certainly not equality, but room to earn, manage, negotiate, and sometimes command. A successful madam could control property, staff, supply chains, and client lists, with a level of business authority denied to many other women. That power was precarious and morally compromised, but it was still power. Meanwhile, actresses, singers, saloon women, and dressmakers serving the nightlife economy occupied social territory that was unstable but not always entirely degraded. The city's moral map leaves many of them in grey zones, and grey zones are where real lives often happen. Researchers still disagree about how much agency women in these districts genuinely possessed versus how much later storytelling projected onto them. Some sources celebrate female resilience so eagerly that they risk polishing over coercion and fear. Others flatten women into pure victims and miss their wit, discipline, and negotiation. The truth, like the streets themselves, is uneven. A woman may be trapped in one respect and resourceful in another. She may endure exploitation while still making choices every hour. Human lives rarely offer the simplicity reformers and sensationalists seem to crave. A curious little detail from urban social life is the importance of female clothing repair and exchange. Dresses were remade, retrimmed, let out, taken in, rented, pawned, and revived with astonishing creativity. One skirt might live several lives. A respectable bodice today could become something much brighter by evening with the right ribbon, lace, and confidence. Clothing was not just fashion, it was adaptation disguised aspiration and economy stitched together. As afternoon begins to lean toward an evening, the women around you seem to shift roles without pausing to announce it. A servant becomes a shopper on her way home. A shop girl becomes a daughter carrying meat wrapped in paper. A boarding house keeper becomes a collector of rent. A singer rests her voice before the lamps come up. A mother finishes mending while watching the street for her child. A woman in silk leans in a doorway and smiles with exactly the amount of invitation that will pay and not promise too much. The city asks them all to perform, but never the same part. You begin to feel how exhausting this must be, this constant reading and being read. And yet there is grace in it too. Not romantic grace, not the soft glow of paintings, but the hard grace of competence. The knowledge of prices routes, faces moods, rents, dangers, fabrics, timings, and lies. Women carry a map of the city inside them. Sometimes it is a map of opportunity. Sometimes it is a map of avoidance. Usually it is both. As the evening nears and the sidewalks gather fresh traffic, you understand that the famous Vice District is not simply a place where women are seen. It is a place where they are interpreting, supporting, resisting, selling, organising, evading, and enduring. The city may have been built to flatter male adventure, but it is women who often know how it actually works. And just ahead where the lamps begin to glow warmer and voices grow louder, the men are preparing once again to act as if they invented the drama. The men make themselves known before you fully decide to watch them. Their presence carries a certain volume not just in voice, but in posture in the way they occupy space, as if space itself were something to be claimed and defended. You see it in the set of shoulders, the tilt of a hat, the deliberate slowness of a walk that could easily be faster. Nothing here is entirely accidental, even idleness is performed. You step aside as two men pass their boots striking the boards with a rhythm that feels rehearsed. They are not particularly well dressed yet, each detail is intentional. A polished buckle, a carefully knotted scarf, a coat brushed just enough to suggest pride. In a place where money can come and go between sunrise and midnight, appearance becomes a kind of insurance. You may not have much, but you can still look like someone who expects to be taken seriously. Masculinity here is less a quiet certainty and more a public act. It is expressed through confidence, even when confidence is in short supply. A man laughs louder than necessary, argues with more certainty than evidence supports, and leans against a doorway as though he owns both the door and the idea of doors. It is not always convincing, but it is persistent. In a city where reputation can change overnight, performance becomes a daily habit. One thing widely observed in 19th century urban culture is that social identity among men was often tied to visible markers such as occupation, dress, and behaviour. A labourer, a clerk, a gambler, a tradesman, a soldier, each carried signals that others could read at a glance. In districts known for vice, these signals could blur, but they never disappeared entirely. You can often tell who works with their hands, who works with numbers, and who works with chance. You notice how groups form and dissolve. Men cluster at corners in front of shops outside saloons. They exchange news jokes, complaints, and small bits of information that may or may not be reliable. Then they break apart again, pulled by shifts, errands, or opportunities. The city encourages this fluidity. Nothing here feels permanently fixed. Even friendships seem to operate on flexible terms, strong in the moment, uncertain in the long run. There is also a constant undercurrent of competition, not always violent, not always obvious, but present. Who earns more? Who dresses better? Who wins at cards? Who commands attention? Who can tell the best story or drink the longest or walk away from an insult without losing face? It is exhausting to watch, which suggests it must be even more exhausting to maintain. You pause near a group gathered around a makeshift table where a quick game of cards is underway. The players recant their expressions carefully neutral. Around them, a few spectators offer commentary that is only slightly helpful. Coins pass hands with quiet speed. A man loses shrugs and lights a cigar as if the loss were part of a larger plan. Another wins and pockets the money with equal calm. Emotion here is something to be managed. Too much excitement marks you as inexperienced. Too much disappointment marks you as weak. An interesting detail from accounts of the time is how important storytelling could be among men in these environments. Tales of sarass, adventure, or narrow escapes are circulated constantly. Some were true, some were improved, many were entirely invented. The point was not accuracy, but effect. A good story could elevate a man's standing at least for an evening. It could make him seem more experienced, more daring, more connected to the wider world. You begin to suspect that the city rewards those who can shape their own narrative. If you can present yourself as capable, others may treat you that way long enough for it to become partially true. If you hesitate, the city notices. Hesitation invites questions, and questions can lead to trouble. Of course, not every man fits the same pattern. You see quiet figures too. A clerk reading a ledger in a doorway, a craftsman focused on his tools, a porter moving steadily without any interest in performance. These men carry themselves differently, less display, more purpose. They are not invisible, but they do not seek attention either. In a way, their restraint stands out just as much as the louder behaviour around them. There is also the matter of age. Younger men tend to lean more heavily into the performance-testing boundaries, proving themselves in small and sometimes foolish ways. Older men often move with a kind of economy-conserving energy, choosing when to engage and when to step back. Experience, it seems, teaches selectivity. Not every challenge needs to be answered. Not every opportunity is worth the risk. Observers have long debated how much of this behaviour was shaped by the environment itself. Did the city encourage exaggeration and bravado, or did it simply attract men who already favoured those traits? It is difficult to say with certainty. Perhaps it is a mixture of both. The setting rewards visibility, so people become more visible. The setting tolerates risk, so risk becomes more common. You watch as a small disagreement begins to form between two men near the corner. Voices rise slightly, not yet loud enough to draw a crowd, but enough to signal tension. Others glance over, measuring the situation. Will this become something serious, or will it dissolve into laughter? The moment stretches, then breaks. One man shrugs, the other steps back, and the conversation shifts. Conflict here is always close, but not always inevitable. There is a shared understanding that too much trouble can bring unwanted attention. A curious observation from the period is how often men relied on small rituals to maintain order in otherwise unpredictable settings. A handshake, a nod, a shared drink, these gestures carried meaning. They signalled respect, agreement, or at least temporary peace. In a place where formal rules were unevenly applied, informal codes helped fill the gaps. As the light begins to soften again, you notice a subtle change. The daytime urgency eases and the evening persona starts to emerge. Coats are brushed again, hats adjusted, faces washed or at least wiped. The same men who spent the day hauling crates or tallying accounts now prepare to step into a different version of themselves. The transition is almost theatrical, though no one announces it. You realise that this constant shifting is part of survival. To work hard by day and still find energy to perform by night requires a certain resilience or perhaps a certain stubbornness. The city does not allow for a single identity. It asks for adaptability. You must be a worker, a negotiator, a performer, a listener, and occasionally a strategist, all within the same set of hours. There is a moment standing there as the lamps begin to glow once more when the whole system feels both impressive and fragile. So much depends on maintaining the act. Confidence must be sustained. Reputation must be defended. Wages must be earned and stretched. One misstep can ripple outward in ways that are difficult to predict. Yet the performance continues because it has to. The men laugh again louder now. A new game begins. Someone calls for drinks. The city shifts into its evening rhythm, and the boundaries between work and leisure blur once more. You take a step forward, drawn by the sound of voices and the promise of warmth inside a nearby doorway. The saloon, it seems, is ready to receive its audience, and perhaps to reveal that it is more than just a place to drink. The saloon draws you in with light. First, then warmth, then noise. From the street it looks almost simple, just another door beneath a painted sign, but once you step inside, the place opens into one of the city's true social engines. The air is thicker here. Tobacco hangs in a low haze. Wet wool steams gently as coats begin to dry. Glass catches the lamplight. Somewhere at the far end, a piano is trying to be cheerful on behalf of everyone present. It is not succeeding perfectly, but it is trying very hard, and that counts for something. You might expect a room devoted purely to drinking, but that is not really how it works. The saloon is part club, part lunch counter, part post office, part hiring hall, part political headquarters, part refuge from weather, and part stage set for the daily theatre of masculine self-importance. If a church offers one kind of fellowship and a boarding house offers another. The saloon offers a rougher and more public version of both. You can warm yourself here, hear the news, make contacts, lose money, find work, borrow confidence and damage your reputation often before the second glass. This was one of the most familiar features of 19th century urban life. In many American cities, saloons were everywhere, especially in working-class neighborhoods and districts known for nightlife. Their number could be astonishing. Reformers complained about them constantly, which is often how you know something was deeply woven into ordinary life. They were not marginal institutions, they were central ones. For many men, and for some women as well, the saloon functioned as a daily meeting place, more dependable than any formal civic hall. You stand near the bar for a moment and let your eyes settle. The room sorts itself into zones. Closest to the counter are the regulars men who lean with the confidence of people who believe their presence improves the establishment. At the tables are card players, talkers, and those who wish to look occupied, while actually observing everybody else. Near the stove sits a cluster of older men holding glasses with the grave tenderness of philosophers. Toward the back, where light is dimmer, and chairs more uneven, smaller negotiations unfold. A message passed. A debt discussed, a job mentioned, a warning given low and quick. The bartender is the true conductor of this arrangement. He serves drinks, yes, but he also reads tempers, remembers faces, extends or denies credit, hears gossip before anyone else and decides when to ignore an offence and when to stop one. In many neighbourhoods, the saloon keeper became an influential figure precisely because he stood at the crossroads of information and appetite. He might know which factory has dismissed workers, which ward politician needs votes, which policeman is in a bad mood, which funeral will draw half the block tomorrow. He may even know who is married, who has vanished, and who should not be allowed near the back room after payday. Food appears too because human vice remains stubbornly dependent on lunch. On one side stands a free lunch spread intended to keep customers close and thirsty. Bread, pickles, cheese, boiled eggs, perhaps slices of meat or a tureen of stew that has seen more history than it should. In some saloons, the lunch counter became nearly as important as the drink itself for working men with limited cash. Buy a beer and eat enough to feel fortified. It is not charity exactly. It is strategy wearing an apron. One especially telling detail from the era is that some saloons kept spittoons, newspapers, writing materials, and even informal message systems for patrons. A man without a stable home or office might receive word there. A labour recruiter might leave notice. Friends might agree to meet there after shifts. The saloon in that sense was a communication network as much as a drinking establishment. Not an elegant one, certainly, but effective. You notice how many small transactions happen without fanfare. A man slides a coin across the bar and receives not just a drink, but also a hint about workloading freight tomorrow. Another takes a letter from the bartender who has held it behind the counter. Two men in aprons stop for a quick glass and leave with bread wrapped in paper for later. Someone borrows a match. Someone asks quietly whether a bed can be found for a cousin newly arrived. The saloon absorbs all these needs as if this were the most natural thing in the world, and to the people using it, perhaps it is. Of course, it also carries the risks everyone associates with it. Drinking can turn ease into argument with astonishing speed. Credit can lead to resentment. Gambling slips in from the edges. Boasts grow louder. Grief grows looser. A man who arrives hoping only for company may leave with less money, more enemies, and an opinion about politics he did not have when he entered. Yet even that danger is part of the attraction. The saloon promises liveliness. It offers a temporary escape from loneliness routine and the thin walls of boarding house life. Here at least a person can feel surrounded. Writers and historians have not always agreed on whether saloons should be understood mainly as destructive spaces or as vital community institutions for working-class urban residents. The answer depends a great deal on where you stand in the room. A reformer sees temptation, debt, ruined families, and public disorder. A labourer may see heat news, fellowship, and one place in the city where no one asks him to explain himself too carefully. Both views contain truth. That is what makes the saloon so hard to summarise neatly and so easy to mythologise badly. You begin to hear the political talk now low at first, then sharper. This too belongs here. In many immigrant and working-class districts, saloons operated as neighbourhood political centres. Ward leaders courted patrons. Meetings happened in back rooms. Loyalty could be built one round at a time. A free drink is not a philosophy, but it can encourage a man to listen to one. The machinery of democracy, as it turns out, often smells faintly of beer and cigar smoke. There is another layer you might miss if you only glance around. The saloon gives men permission to be together in public without a purpose that sounds weak. Loneliness is not admitted. Homesickness is not admitted. Fear is certainly not admitted. But camaraderie, argument, storytelling, singing and drinking serve as acceptable containers for all kinds of softer feelings that cannot be named directly. A man who would never confess sadness may happily buy a companion a glass and sit talking for 2 hours about river traffic, horseflesh, and a cousin back in Missouri. The emotions slip through side doors. A curious little practice in some establishments was the use of ornate mirrors behind the bar, not merely for decoration, but to amplify light and spectacle. The effect could make the room look larger, brighter and grander than it was. That seems fitting somehow. The saloon, like the city itself, often enlarges appearances. A narrow room becomes an arena. A weary clerk becomes a wit. A single evening becomes a legend by closing time. You stay long enough to feel how the room changes as night advances. More laughter now. More music. The air warmer, thicker, fuller. Men just off work mix with drifters, salesmen, local political operators, and those whose occupations are better left vague for everyone's comfort. The saloon does not erase distinctions, but it blurs them for an hour or two. Cash matters, nerve matters, conversation matters. Beyond that, the room is surprisingly democratic in a rough-edged way, and yet it is not the whole night. Beyond these doors, other spaces are brightening too. Places with more music, more colour, more female labour, more deliberate illusion. The saloon is the city's public living room, yes, but down the street the dance halls are already beginning to glow like promises nobody entirely believes and everybody still wants to inspect. The dance hall announces itself before you reach the door, not with the thick conversational hum of the saloon, but with rhythm, a piano working hard, a fiddle soaring away with conviction, laughter that rises in bright little bursts and then disappears into the street. Light spills through curtains and across the boards outside where a few men pause to smooth their coats, adjust their cuffs and compose the sort of expression they imagine looks effortless. It does not. That is part of the charm. Inside the room is warmer, brighter and far more intentional than the street beyond it. The city outside may be mud, smoke, rent and nerves, but here someone has taken pains to arrange a different atmosphere. Mirrors catch the lamplight. Coloured fabric softens rough walls. The musicians are set where them can be seen. The floor has been cleared for movement. It is not luxury in the grand sense. It is staged pleasure. That distinction matters. Most people here cannot afford true elegance, so they purchase the next best thing, which is the feeling of it for an evening. You stand near the entrance and let the room reveal itself. Men arrive hoping to be noticed without looking too hopeful. Women already inside have mastered the difficult art of seeming both available and entirely in control of the terms of attention. Dresses flash under the lamps, shoes tap, voices lower and rise. A waiter or attendant slips through the crowd carrying glasses with the solemn concentration of a diplomat in a tense negotiation. In one corner, a woman laughs at something a man has said, though from the look in her eyes, the joke itself is less important than the coin that may follow. Dance halls were a familiar part of nightlife in many 19th century American cities, especially in neighbourhoods associated with entertainment vice or transient working populations. They offered music, social contact, alcohol, and a structured kind of flirtation that could seem more respectable than a brothel, and more exciting than a boarding house parlour. That middle position made them significant. They were not merely decorative features of urban nightlife. They were workplaces, meeting grounds, and commercial spaces built around atmosphere. You begin to see how much labour is required to produce that atmosphere. The musicians do not simply play. They keep the room in motion, judge the crowd's mood, and push the evening forward when energy begins to sag. The women working the floor, whether as dancers, hostesses, entertainers, or some fluid combination of all three, perform an even more demanding task. They must be charming without promising too much, attentive without losing caution, lively, even when tired and perceptive enough to sort the harmless from the troublesome in a glance. It is social acrobatics in good shoes. That work is often invisible in later stories because later stories prefer sparkle to effort. Yet the emotional management in a dance hall is intense. You do not simply dance, you encourage spending. You flatter egos without inflating them to the point of danger. You keep conversation moving. You remember names, preferences, rivalries, and sometimes debts. A woman here may spend an entire evening making strangers feel less lonely while carrying her own fatigue as lightly as possible. It is one of the most draining forms of labour precisely because it is supposed to look easy. Some halls worked on the systems that tied women's earnings to drinks, dances, or commissions, which meant friendliness had direct financial value. The details varied from city to city and house to house, but the general structure is clear enough. Glamour had bookkeeping behind it. A man buying a ticket for a dance or ordering drinks was not simply expressing pleasure. He was participating in a carefully arranged economy of attention. Romance, or the impression of romance, could be itemized. One fascinating oddity from certain urban dance halls is the use of dance tickets or tokens. A patron bought a strip of dances in advance, and each one entitled him to a turn around the floor with a particular woman. It sounds almost quaint until you remember the purpose was to translate sociability into measurable income. The room might look spontaneous. The receipt suggested otherwise. You watch a set begin. Couples take the floor. Some dance well, some move with endearing stiffness, some appear to be wrestling politely in rhythm. The musicians keep time with admirable patience. Around the edges, women not dancing remain watchful. A smile is offered here, a glance there, a small gesture to draw a hesitant customer forward. Every inch of the room is active, even in stillness. The sounds are different from the saloon. There is more brightness here, more upward motion in the voices, more deliberate laughter. The smells are different too. Less stew and wet wool, more perfume pomade, dust, lamp oil, and the hot, close scent of many bodies sharing one room. If the saloon feels like a public living room, the dance hall feels like a temporary dream rented by the hour. For a labourer with sore hands and one decent shirt, that dream can be very persuasive. At the same time, the dream is fragile. The lighting flatters, but it cannot erase everything. A hem is mended a little too visibly. A cuff has been turned and resewn. A smile slips for half a second when a customer looks away. Behind the shimmer there is constant maintenance. Dresses need cleaning and repair, hair needs arranging, shoes wear out, voices tire. The city's nightlife rests on women who must keep themselves presentable in a place that wears people down quickly. Commentators from the period and later historians have disagreed over how to classify these spaces. Were dance halls mainly harmless amusements, gateways to more openly commercial sex, or something more complicated in between? The answer changes depending on the hall, the city, and the people involved. Some were relatively regulated and public. Others were closely tied to prostitution or criminal networks. Many occupied the uncertain middle ground that urban life seems to produce so naturally, where entertainment, courtship, commerce, and risk all overlap without ever becoming identical. You notice how class is performed here too. Men with more money can buy more dances, better drinks, finer attention. Men with less money linger at the edges, calculating whether one round on the floor is worth tomorrow's lunch. Women read these distinctions quickly, but not always cruelly. Sometimes a poor but decent customer earns genuine warmth because he is respectful, amusing, or simply familiar. Sometimes a prosperous man earns only professional patience because prosperity and charm are not the same thing, despite what prosperous men so often believe. Another thing becomes clear. The dance hall is not just about desire. It is about witnessing and being witnessed. To enter is to join a room where everyone is reading everyone else. Who is new, who is flush with cash, who is lonely, who is already drunk, who has influence, who is pretending to have influence, who might be kind, who might become trouble after the third drink. The room is social intelligence in motion. A smaller detail but a revealing one is the way chairs line the walls. They are not merely for rest. They are for observation, for negotiation, for deciding whether to step in or stay out. Many evenings in such places are spent less in dancing than in watching the possibility of dancing. Anticipation itself is part of the product. The room sells potential as skillfully as it sells music. You stay long enough to see the strain under the shine. A performer disappears briefly behind a curtain and returns with her smile restored by will rather than magic. A musician rolls his shoulders between numbers. A floor manager steps in quietly when one patron becomes too persistent. The illusion holds because many people are working to hold it. That may be the truest thing about the hall. It is beautiful in places but never effortless, and still for all that it works. For a few hours the room lets people imagine themselves differently. The clerk feels elegant. The drover feels cosmopolitan. The widow feels seen. The lonely man feels less alone. The woman earning her living through grace and control feels perhaps briefly powerful, or at least fully competent in a world that grants women too little authority elsewhere. The city's rough edges do not disappear, but they soften under music. Then in a pause between tunes you hear another current beneath the laughter. Not dancing this time, but chants, coins, cards. The distinct hush that comes when hope decides to sit at a table and risk becoming foolish. Somewhere nearby, under another set of lamps, the gamblers are already at work. The gambling room does not call out the way the dance hall does. It draws you in more quietly with a kind of concentrated gravity. The light is lower, more focused. The noise is softer but sharper. Here voices drop instead of rising. Movement slows. Even the air feels different, as if it has been asked to behave itself. You step inside and immediately sense that this is a place where attention matters, where a single glance can carry more weight than a full conversation elsewhere. Tables sit arranged with purpose, cards are dealt with practiced ease. Dice rest in hands that seem both casual and intensely aware. Coin chips or notes pass across surfaces in gestures that are swift and precise. The players lean forward slightly, their eyes trained on the small universe in front of them. Around them, observers hover at a respectful distance, careful not to interfere, eager to witness. The room is not loud, but it hums with a kind of restrained electricity. Games of chance were deeply embedded in many 19th century American urban centres, particularly in districts known for nightlife and transient populations. Faro poker roulette and various dice games appeared frequently, each with its own rituals and reputations. Some were considered more respectable than others, though that distinction often depended on who was losing money at the time. Gambling was not an occasional diversion here. It was part of the local economy, as familiar as the saloon or the boarding house. You take a place near one of the tables and watch a hand unfold. The dealer moves with steady rhythm, neither hurried nor low. The players respond in kind. A card is revealed, a breath is held, another card, a small shift in posture, a coin placed or withdrawn. It is remarkable how much emotion is compressed into these tiny movements. Excitement is contained. Disappointment is hidden. Triumph is muted. To display too much feeling is to invite attention, and attention can be dangerous in a room built on calculation. Luck is the word most often spoken, but skill is never entirely absent. Players study patterns, watch one another, remember past hands. Whether these efforts truly improve their chances is another question. Some insist that experience gives an edge. Others quietly admit that chance rules the room more completely than anyone likes to acknowledge. The tension between control and randomness is part of the appeal. You sit here believing you can influence the outcome even as the cards quietly disagree. There is also the matter of trust, or the appearance of it. Dealers are expected to be fair, though not everyone is convinced they always are. Players watch closely. Newcomers are watched even more closely. A suspicious move, a hesitation, a glance at the wrong moment, all can trigger murmurs. In some establishments, safeguards are in place. In others, reputation alone carries the weight. The line between legitimate play and subtle manipulation is not always clear, and that uncertainty adds another layer of tension to the room. An intriguing aspect of gambling culture in this era is the variety of superstitions that accompany it. Players develop rituals, small habits meant to influence fortune, a particular way of holding the cards, a lucky coin kept in a pocket, a refusal to sit in a certain chair. These practices may have no measurable effect, but they offer a sense of control in a setting where outcomes are unpredictable. Watching them, you realize that belief itself can be part of the game. You notice how the crowd shifts as the evening deepens. Some players arrive with confidence, pockets full, ready to test their luck. Others drift in more cautiously, drawn by curiosity or the hope of a quick gain. A few leave quickly, their expressions tight, their steps faster than when they entered. Loss has a way of accelerating movement. Those who remain tend to settle into the rhythm of the room, accepting its pace, its rules, its quiet demands. Money behaves differently here. Outside it buys food, rent, clothing. Inside it becomes something more abstract. It represents possibility, risk, status. A stack of coins can shrink or grow in moments, and with it a person's sense of control over their own life. You see a man win a modest sum and smile with restrained satisfaction. Another loses steadily, his face revealing little, though his hands grow slightly more rigid. The emotional economy of the room is as complex as the financial one. There is a certain discipline required to stay in such a place without losing more than you intended. Some manage it. They set limits to walk away at the right moment, treat the game as entertainment rather than livelihood. Others find that harder. The allure of recovery, of turning a loss into a gain, can be powerful. It keeps people at the table longer than they planned, encourages risks they might avoid in daylight. Observers from the period often struggled to agree on the role of gambling in urban life. Some saw it as a corrosive force, draining years and encouraging recklessness. Others viewed it as a natural extension of a society already built on risk and speculation. After all, the broader economy itself involved uncertainty, investment, and the hope of profit. In that sense, the gambling table could be seen as a smaller, more immediate version of larger economic patterns. You watch a dealer pause, briefly shuffle the cards with care, and begin again. The repetition is almost soothing despite the stakes. There is a rhythm to it, a pattern that the room settles into. For a moment you understand the appeal not just as excitement but as focus. In a city full of noise and distraction, the table offers a narrow field of attention. Cards, coins, hands, everything else fades. A small but telling detail is the presence of watchers who never play. They stand at the edges, observing, learning, perhaps waiting for the right moment. Some may be cautious by nature. Others may lack the funds to participate. Still, they remain drawn by the spectacle, by the possibility that they might one day step forward. The room accommodates them too, offering a role that requires no risk, only patience. As the hour grows later, the atmosphere thickens. Not with noise, but with concentration. The stakes may rise. The players lean closer. The observers quiet further. It feels as though the room itself is holding its breath, waiting for outcomes that will be decided by forces no one fully controls. You realize that this more than anything defines the space. It is not just about winning or losing, it is about engaging with uncertainty in its purest form. Eventually you step back, letting the table continue without you. The room does not notice your departure. It is too focused on its own internal logic. Outside the city continues its other rhythm still in motion. Music drifts from a nearby hall. Voices rise and fall. Somewhere laughter breaks through the night air. You pause for a moment, considering what you have seen. The gambling room offers a different kind of escape, one built on numbers, chance, and the delicate balance between hope and caution. It is quieter than the dance hall, more controlled than the saloon, yet no less compelling. And like those places, it depends on people willing to step inside to take part, to risk something in exchange for the possibility of more. As you turn back toward the street, you sense that another layer of the city is waiting to be understood, one that deals not in cards or coins, but in more personal transactions, where intimacy, power, and survival intersect in ways that are far less predictable. Past the brighter rooms of music and cards, the city enters one of its most carefully managed zones of illusion. The brothel district, or the scattered houses and rooms that serve the same purpose, does not always advertise itself with open vulgarity. Often it relies on suggestion. A lamp in a certain window, a polished doorway, curtains too heavy for an ordinary household, a woman seated where she can be seen but not too plainly. The whole effect is meant to feel inviting and controlled, which is important because control is one of the main things being sold here, even when it is more appearance than reality. You approach slowly aware that this part of the city has been described so often in legend that reality almost struggles to get a word in. Popular memory likes to flatten everything into caricature. The lavish madam, the tragic fallen woman, the drunken customer, the wicked red lamp. But daily life in the business of sex during the 19th century was far more layered, more bureaucratic, and in many ways more ordinary than later melodrama suggests. Rent had to be paid, clothing had to be mended, meals had to be served, sheets had to be washed, accounts had to be kept, someone had to answer the door. That perhaps is the first thing to understand. Prostitution in American cities of the 1800s was not a tiny hidden fringe. In many growing urban centres, it formed a visible and organised part of local economies, especially in districts with large transient male populations, weak regulation, or steady flows of cash from shipping, mining, railroads, or seasonal labour. Some women worked independently, some worked in brothels under madams, some moved in and out of the trade depending on money, health, or other forms of work available to them. The structure varied, but the trade itself was woven into urban life more deeply than polite society liked to admit. You see the layers immediately. At one end of the scale there are relatively grand houses, places furnished to suggest refinement. Carpets, mirrors, parlour chairs, piano music filtering from another room. Guests are expected to behave with a degree of manners, or at least with the expensive imitation of manners. The other end are cramped rooms above saloons, alley houses, cheap cribs and rented corners where comfort has long since surrendered. The difference matters enormously. Conditions, earnings, safety, food, clothing, and the ability to refuse a customer all shift according to where a woman stands in this hierarchy. The women themselves do not fit one simple story. Some are very young, which unsettles you in the quiet, sober way reality always should. Some are older practiced, sharply observant, and far less easy to deceive than the men entering the house imagine. Some are supporting children. Some are paying off debts. Some have come from domestic service garment work, theatrical circles, or failed marriages. Some are in the trade briefly. Some remain for years. They joke quarrel rest style. Their hair wash stockings, lend one another pins, share gossip, nurse headaches, and calculate earnings. The myth prefers spectacle. Actual life keeps insisting on routine. A useful point recognised by many historians is that prostitution often paid more than the most common forms of female wage labour available to poor and working class women. Laundry, sewing, domestic service, factory work, and boarding house labour were back-breaking and poorly paid. That fact does not make prostitution easy, safe, or glamorous. It does explain part of its persistence. When respectable labour cannot cover rent, the word respectable begins to feel less like a virtue and more like an expensive hobby for somebody else. The madam is one of the most distinctive figures in this world and also one of the most misunderstood. In some houses she is part manager, part financier, part disciplinarian, part protector and part exploiter. She buys furnishings, negotiates with suppliers, handles police payments if such payments are necessary, screens, customers, manages reputations, and takes a cut that can be large enough to inspire creative resentment. A successful madam may appear commanding, even luxurious, but her comfort rests on constant balancing. Too much disorder and the house becomes dangerous. Too much visibility and reformers or police may descend. Too little profit and the whole arrangement weakens. One revealing detail from the period is the existence of printed directories in some cities that listed brothels and categorized them by perceived class or atmosphere. They were sold, consulted, and discussed with a blend of mockery and practicality. It is a strange little reminder that vice was not always hidden. Sometimes it was mapped, reviewed, and folded into the ordinary urban knowledge of men who pretended by day to be shocked by exactly what they sought by night. Inside a better-kept house, the atmosphere is curated with care, not luxury exactly, but a version of comfort arranged to justify the price. Lamps softened by shades, upholstery chosen to flatter the room, perfume used not too heavily, though the line between elegant and overpowering can be thin when the hall is warm. A tray with glasses, a piano waiting to be touched. The woman greeting visitors may speak with practiced ease, making a man feel selected rather than processed, which is a difficult trick and a valuable one. Intimacy here is partly theatre, but theatre can still demand real emotional skill. That skill comes at a cost. To work in this trade is to manage other people's moods while guarding your own energy as best you can. You must read danger quickly. You must soothe vanity, avoid offence. Keep time moving and maintain some private interior space even while selling access to your presence. The emotional labour is immense, so is the physical toll. Long hours, irregular sleep, alcohol in the room whether desired or not, the constant need for presentation and the daily risk of illness all weigh heavily. Health is one of the great silent pressures in this world. Venereal disease haunted urban life in the 19th century, though people understood it imperfectly and treated it with a confidence far beyond medical justification. Remedies ranged from cautious rest and hygiene to mercury-based treatments that could be nearly as punishing as the disease itself. Public discussion often focused on policing women's bodies while excusing male customers with a shrug that history should frankly be embarrassed about. Moral standards like street paving were distributed very unevenly. There is still real discussion among scholars about the degree of choice women exercise within prostitution, especially across different classes of establishments. Some evidence shows strategy, mobility, and negotiation. Other evidence shows coercion, poverty, debt, addiction, abuse, and extremely narrow alternatives. Most likely, the trade contained all of these at once. A woman could be shrewd and constrained, resourceful and exploited financially, active and profoundly vulnerable. Human lives refused to stay in the neat boxes reform tracts and sensational newspapers would prefer. You notice too how much hypocrisy the district absorbs on behalf of the wider city. Men who would publicly condemn prostitution may privately visit. Politicians who speak of civic virtue may quietly rely on the taxes, bribes, or informal order such districts provide. Landlords collect rent, dressmakers earn money, grocers supply food, doctors treat patients, laundrywomen wash sheets, carriage drivers wait outside. The trade is never the work of one woman and one customer alone. It exists inside a whole supporting network that likes very much to deny its own participation. Some houses develop rules that sound almost domestic in their practicality. No fighting, no credit, no drunkenness past a point, no theft between residents, meals at set times, doors locked at certain hours. In the middle of all the moral noise surrounding prostitution, this ordinary discipline can feel oddly startling, yet it makes sense. Any business that survives in a chaotic city must invent routines, and brothels were no exception. Behind the velvet curtain there is often bookkeeping. A smaller but striking detail is how heavily appearance depended on maintenance and repair. Gowns were cleaned, altered, retrimmed, and restyled repeatedly. Jewellery might be imitation. Hairpieces and cosmetics extended the effect of freshness long after a workday should reasonably have ended. A woman in silk beneath gaslight might have spent the afternoon darning stockings and bargaining over soap. The glow was real, so was the labour behind it. As you stand in this carefully managed world, the city's deeper truth becomes harder to ignore. The business of sex is not separate from everyday life. It is built out of the same economic pressures, the same loneliness, the same hunger for comfort, the same unequal rules applied to men and women, and the same relentless need to turn time into money. Some come here for pleasure, some come for company, some come because the city has stripped their lives of softness and they want to rent it back for an hour. When you step outside again, the night air feels cooler, cleaner, and less honest. Behind you, the lamps continue glowing in their windows. Ahead, the rest of the district goes on selling drink, music, chances, meals, and dreams. But this part of the city leaves you with a sharper understanding of how survival works here. It is intimate, commercial, unequal, disciplined, and deeply entangled with everything around it. and somewhere beyond the next corner the people charged with maintaining order are preparing to prove that order too can be bought, bent, or performed depending on who is watching. The further you go, the more obvious it becomes that law and disorder are not opposites here. They live on the same street, nod to each other, borrow one another's tools, and occasionally share a drink. You begin to see policemen as part of the evening landscape just as common as bartenders, gamblers, laundresses, and women in bright dresses leaning in doorways. They move through the district with a studied mixture of authority and familiarity. Some look stern for effect. Some look tired in a way that suggests they stopped believing in effect a long time ago. You might imagine that a so-called Sin City has no rules, but that is not how it works. It has rules everywhere. The difficulty is that the rules are uneven negotiable, and often aimed less at ending vice than at managing it. One house is left alone, another irraded. One saloon is fined for a violation everyone commits. Another stays open because its owner knows the right ward boss. One woman is dragged into court for public disorder. A wealthy customer strolls home without so much as a lecture. The city is full of morality, but it is distributed with remarkable creativity. Police forces in 19th century American cities were often still developing into the more formal institutions people later assumed them to be. That meant inconsistent training, political influence, limited manpower, and frequent local favoritism. In rapidly growing urban districts, especially those known for vice, the police were often less interested in eliminating certain activities than in containing them, profiting from them, or making periodic examples when reform pressure became too loud to ignore. Public order mattered. Private hypocrisy mattered too. You see this in the rhythm of the streets. A patrolman passes a saloon where everyone knows gambling happens in the back room, yet he does not go in. Farther along, he stops a drunk man, not because drunkenness is unusual, but because the man is loud enough to disrupt the balance. A balance, not a principle. That seems to be the important thing. Cities can tolerate a great deal if it remains profitable, familiar, and mostly indoors. What they dislike is embarrassment in public. The courts are no less selective. Minor charges pile up in vice districts with a sort of weary regularity. Disorderly conduct, drunkenness, vagrancy, soliciting, petty theft, fighting. The exact wording matters less than the pattern. Law becomes a net cast most often over the poor, the visible, and the inconvenient. A woman in the wrong doorway may be arrested, while a landlord collecting rent from that same doorway remains entirely respectable in the eyes of the court. It is an impressive system if your goal is not fairness but choreography. Moral reformers, meanwhile, patrol the city in a different style. They do not usually carry clubs, but they do carry pamphlets, sermons, petitions, and a level of perseverance that would be admirable if it were less exhausting to everyone around them. Mission workers, charity matrons, church women, temperance advocates, rescue home organisers, and self-appointed guardians of public decency all move through this world with real conviction. Some bring practical help, food beds, medical care, legal assistance. Others bring mostly judgment in better tailoring. Many bring both. One small but revealing custom of the era was the periodic public raid, sometimes staged with enough visibility to reassure respectable voters that someone somewhere still believed in order. These raids could sweep through gambling rooms, dance halls, or brothels with great commotion, only for business to resume days later, sometimes hours later. Once fines were paid, names were recorded, and newspapers had their fill of outrage. The performance of enforcement could matter as much as the result. You begin to realize that the law here functions partly as theatre. It sends signals. It reminds the public that boundaries exist even when everyone knows they are porous. It comforts those who live outside the district and would prefer not to think too closely about how deeply the district is tied to the rest of the city. A raid says we are in control. A quiet arrangement says we are practical. Most nights practicality wins. That practicality often has a price. Corruption in one form or another appears again and again in accounts of 19th century urban vice districts. A saloon keeper pays to avoid trouble. A madam contributes to a police fund. Political ward leader protects certain businesses in exchange for loyalty at election time. Patrolman overlooks one offence and cracks down on another. Not every officer is corrupt naturally. Some are dutiful, some harsh, some frightened, some decent, some simply overwhelmed. But the system itself often invited compromise, because the line between governance and patronage was thinner than official speeches like to admit. There has long been disagreement among historians over whether tolerated vice districts represented a cynical but effective form of urban management or a profound failure of public morality and legal equality. The argument is not easy to settle. Concentrating vice in certain blocks may have made it more visible and more controllable. It also meant accepting exploitation as part of civic order. It reduced some forms of chaos while entrenching others. Cities are often very good at calling a compromise practical when the burden falls on someone else. You watch a policeman stop to speak with a woman outside a boarding house. The exchange is brief and unreadable. Perhaps it is a warning. Perhaps it is routine. Perhaps it is social. In these neighbourhoods, the boundary between official and personal familiarity often blurs. Officers know who lives where, who causes trouble, who pays on time, who is sick, who has a violent customer, who has a brother in city government who is newly arrived and still likely to make beginner mistakes. Knowledge is power, but also habit. A vice district is not merely patrolled, it is memorized. Courts, churches, newspapers, and reform societies all contribute to the language used to describe these places. That language matters because it shapes who deserves sympathy and who receives punishment. A male gambler may be called foolish, a woman in prostitution is called fallen, a drunken labourer is weak, a landlord is rarely called anything at all. Words become tools of sorting, they make inequality sound like character. The people living in the district understand this perfectly well. They develop their own methods of dealing with authority. Some cultivate friendly relations with police. Some keep bribe money ready, some memorize legal procedures, some avoid certain streets or certain nights, some rely on neighborhood witnesses, informal protectors, or sheer invisibility. Daily life under selective law teaches a person to read mood as carefully as statute. What matters tonight may not matter tomorrow. What is tolerated at dusk may be punished at dawn. A curious feature of urban legal culture in the period is how often women arrested in vice districts were fined rather than jailed for long periods, especially when authorities viewed them as recurring nuisances rather than exceptional criminals. This created a cycle in which fines became almost a business expense for some establishments. It also reinforced the idea that law was not eliminating vice, but taxing it through humiliation and paperwork. The moral language was severe. The administrative reality could be surprisingly routine. You pass a mission house, now its doorway plain but well lit. A few steps away, a saloon spills music onto the same street. That contrast is real, but it can mislead. Reform and vice are not always clean adversaries. Sometimes they depend on one another to define their own importance. The reformer needs visible sin. The district needs visible rescue to reassure outsiders that the city still possesses a conscience somewhere. Meanwhile, ordinary residents continue with the less dramatic work of living between these forces, and that is perhaps the truest thing you learn here. The law is present, yes, but not in the simple form of justice marching bravely through darkness. It is improvised political moralizing, inconsistent, sometimes helpful, sometimes predatory, and always entangled with the city it claims to discipline. Order in these streets is not a stable condition. It is an arrangement constantly negotiated among police politicians, landlords, saloon keepers, reformers, and the people most vulnerable to all of them. As the night goes on, you begin to notice something else as well. The law does not weigh equally on all shoulders. Race, ethnicity, and accent shape who is watched, who is believed, who is protected, and who is punished. In the same city, under the same lamps, different residents are living under very different versions of freedom. You begin to notice it in the way people look at one another. Not just curiosity, not just caution, but something more layered. A quick assessment that goes beyond clothing or posture. Skin tone, accent, surname, the way a word is pronounced, the shape of a hat, the food carried in a basket. The city may gather people from everywhere, but it does not treat them all the same. In fact, it organises difference with quiet efficiency. You walk down a street where signs shift between languages. English dominates, but it does not stand alone. German lettering appears above a bakery. French drifts from a doorway. Chinese characters mark a shopfront further along. Spanish, Irish, brogue, Italian phrases all weave through the air. It feels lively, almost festive, until you realise that each language also marks a boundary. Who belongs here? Who belongs over there? Who is welcome everywhere and who is only tolerated in certain blocks? 19th century American cities grew through waves of immigration and internal migration, bringing together people from Europe, Asia, Latin America, and different regions within the United States itself. This mixing created vibrant neighborhoods, but it also produced sharp divisions. Housing, jobs, and public treatment were often shaped by ethnicity and race in ways that were both obvious and quietly enforced. A person's chances could shift dramatically depending on where they were from and how others perceived them. You pass a group of Irish labourers outside a boarding house, their conversation quick and familiar. A few blocks away, a German beer hall hums with a different rhythm, more subdued, more communal. In another direction, a Chinese laundry operates with steady focus, its workers moving efficiently, speaking in low tones. Each space feels distinct not only in language but in custom, expectation and risk. The city contains all of them yet does not blend them evenly. For Black Americans, the situation is especially complex. In some northern cities, freedom exists in law but not always in practice. Employment opportunities are limited, housing is restricted, social mobility is constrained by prejudice that does not need formal rules to enforce itself. In southern cities, the shadow of slavery and its aftermath shapes every interaction, every opportunity, every boundary. Even in districts known for vice where rules can seem flexible, racial hierarchy remains stubbornly present. You notice how certain jobs cluster along these lines. Black men working as porters, waiters, labourers, Chinese immigrants running laundries or small shops, Irish workers dominating certain manual trades, women from different backgrounds filling domestic roles, factory positions or informal economies depending on what doors are open to them. These patterns are not random, they are shaped by access, discrimination, community networks, and the simple fact that people often hire those they already know or trust. There is also tension, sometimes quiet, sometimes not. Competition for work can turn neighbours into rivals. Cultural differences can become sources of misunderstanding or suspicion. Newspapers of the time often amplified these divisions, portraying certain groups as threats or curiosities rather than as residents with ordinary lives. The city feeds on diversity, but it also struggles with it sometimes harshly. At the same time, you see moments of connection that do not fit the larger pattern. A shared meal between workers from different backgrounds. A business partnership that crosses expected lines. Children playing together in ways adults might hesitate to approve. These moments are small, but they matter. They suggest that the boundaries, while real, are not absolute. One detail that stands out is how food acts as both bridge and barrier. Ethnic neighbourhoods often preserve traditional cooking, offering familiar tastes in an unfamiliar land. A German bakery, an Italian grocer, a Chinese tea shop, each providing comfort to those who recognise the flavours. Yet these same foods can mark difference to outsiders, reinforcing the sense that certain streets belong to certain people. Eating becomes an act of identity as much as sustenance. You begin to understand that freedom in this city is unevenly distributed. Some residents move easily from one district to another, their presence accepted or at least ignored. Others feel the weight of scrutiny, their movements limited by expectation or fear. A man might walk into a saloon without a second thought, while another hesitates, unsure of the reception he will receive. A woman might find work in one neighbourhood and be turned away in another without explanation. Writers and observers from the period often disagreed on whether these divisions were temporary part of a growing city finding its balance or deeply rooted structures that would persist for generations. Some believed that hard work and time would dissolve barriers. Others saw the patterns repeating, reshaping themselves, but never quite disappearing. Looking around, it is difficult to say which view holds more weight. Perhaps both contain elements of truth. You notice how authority interacts with these differences. Police presence varies. Enforcement varies. Disturbance in one neighbourhood may be treated as a serious threat. In another, it might be dismissed or ignored. The same behaviour can carry different consequences depending on who is involved. It is not always written down, but it is understood. A small but telling observation is how quickly newcomers learn these unwritten rules. Advice passes quietly: which streets to avoid after dark, which employers are fair, which establishments welcome certain customers and discourage others. This knowledge spreads through conversation, through observation, through experience. It becomes part of the city's informal education system. You walk past a church where services are held in a language you do not fully understand. The voices inside are steady, familiar to those who gather there. A few steps away, another church offers a different service, a different community. Religion, like everything else, reflects the city's divisions and connections at once. It provides support, identity, and sometimes a sense of belonging that the broader city does not easily grant. The more you observe, the clearer it becomes that the idea of a single unified urban experience is misleading. There are many cities layered within this one. Each group navigates its own version of opportunity and constraint. Each develops its own networks, its own strategies for survival, its own ways of interpreting the same streets. You pause at a corner where several of these layers intersect. A vendor calls out in one language. A passer-by responds in another. A policeman watches his expression neutral. A child laughs unconcerned with any of it. For a moment the complexity feels almost overwhelming. Yet it is also what gives the city its energy. Without these differences, without these interactions, the place would lose much of its character. Still, the unevenness remains. Some lives here are easier than others, some paths are clearer, some doors open more readily. The city offers opportunity, but not equally. It promises freedom, but delivers it in varying degrees. As you move on, you carry this awareness with you. The next street may look similar to the last, but the experiences within it can differ sharply depending on who you are. And somewhere ahead, beyond the noise and the divisions, another set of voices is rising. Bells, perhaps, or hymns, a different kind of gathering offering its own answer to the city's restless energy. The bells reach you before the building does. Not loud enough to silence the district, because almost nothing can silence the district, but clear enough to cut through it for a moment. Music from saloons still drifts nearby. Wagon wheels still knock over the boards. Laughter still rises from the brighter rooms. Yet above and through all that a church bell or mission bell insists on its own place in the soundscape, as if the city is being reminded gently but firmly that it still possesses a soul, or at least several competing opinions about one. You follow the sound and find a modest chapel tucked between noisier businesses, its doorway plain, its windows lit from within. A few steps away stands a mission house with a sign promising coffee, bread scripture, and reform in varying proportions. This is one of the strangest and most revealing sights in a 19th century sin city. Vice and salvation do not occupy opposite ends of the map, they share walls. A brothel may stand near a rescue home. A saloon may spill its customers within sight of a prayer meeting. The city likes its contradictions close enough to smell one another. Religion in these neighbourhoods is not an ornamental afterthought. Churches, missions, charitable societies and rescue homes played a substantial role in urban life across the 19th century, especially in districts associated with poverty, migration, nightlife and moral unease. They offered food, shelter, schooling, medical aid and companionship, but also supervision, correction, and a vigorous interest in other people's choices. To some residents, these places were lifelines. To others, they were annoying little islands of judgment with soup. You step inside the mission first. The room is warm in a less theatrical way than the saloon. No mirrors trying to fatter the walls, no bright dresses, no piano pretending exhaustion is joy. Here the light is steady and practical. Benches line the floor. A kettle steams. Someone hands out bread with the efficient calm of a person who has done this 1,000 times and long ago stopped expecting thanks. A few women sit near the stove. A labourer with a face rubbed raw by weather cradles a tin cup in both hands as though warmth itself was something to be held carefully. The people running these places are not all the same. Some are sincere, kind and deeply patient. Some are stern in that brittle way of the very convinced. Some are both, which perhaps makes them effective. Female reformers in particular became powerful presences in many urban districts, organising shelters, visiting jails, opening industrial homes, teaching sewing, arranging jobs, and trying with mixed success to rescue women from prostitution and men from drink. Their work was often grounded in genuine compassion, but it also carried assumptions about class, gender, and proper behaviour that could feel heavy as wet wool. You can sense that tension even in the gentlest room. A meal may come with a sermon, a bed may come with rules, charity may come with the expectation that you become a different sort of person by morning. For someone cold, hungry and out of options, this bargain can still be worth taking. For someone who has heard moral advice from every direction already, it may feel like one more person explaining your life to you before allowing you a bowl of stew. One revealing feature of mission work in these districts was the use of music as a practical tool. Hymns were sung not only from piety, but because sound carried into the street and drew people in. A warm room and a familiar tune could succeed where pamphlets failed. In some rescue homes and missions, women and children learned songs alongside lessons in literacy or domestic discipline. It is a curious mixture to modern ears, but in these neighbourhoods melody often functioned as outreach, before outreach had become a polished profession. The churches themselves vary enormously. Some are grand and established, serving prosperous congregations who discuss the district with grave concern and perhaps a safe degree of distance. Others are small immigrant parishes, crowded and intimate, where language and ritual offer comfort to people who feel lost in the wider city. Some are black churches, vital centres of spiritual and social life in a communities forced to build support systems under hostile conditions. Others are storefront chapels with more energy than money. All of them are trying in one way or another to create order out of an environment that specialises in friction. You sit quietly for a moment and watch the room. What strikes you is not just belief, but routine. Religion here is woven into daily survival. A woman comes for bread, then stays to pray. A man enters for coffee and finds himself listening to a hymn with the guarded expression of someone determined not to be moved in public. A child recites a verse while swinging one foot under a bench. A mission worker writes down names, addresses, possible placements, and bits of family history. Salvation in these settings can look surprisingly administrative. Some historians have suggested that missions and rescue homes offered one of the only organised support systems available to vulnerable urban women, particularly those facing hunger, illness, abandonment, or pressure into prostitution. Others point out that these same institutions could be restrictive, paternalistic, and unrealistic about the economic shaping women's lives. Both observations are difficult to dismiss. A refuge can still be controlling. A sermon can still be delivered with soup. Human help rarely arrives free of opinion. The contrast with the surrounding streets remains almost absurdly vivid. Outside a dance hall fills with music. Inside, a woman folds donated garments into neat stacks. Outside, glasses clink. Inside, a preacher leans over a table to speak softly, with a dock worker whose shoulders have finally fallen from their defensive height. Outside, someone is selling pleasure. Inside, someone is selling redemption, though technically this part claims redemption is free and only the guilt costs extra. The district contains both markets at once. A smaller detail from the era, but a telling one, is the importance of sewing rooms and industrial training in women's reform institutions. Respectable work, especially for poor women, was often imagined through needle and laundry labour, as if the answer to urban distress were always more scrubbing and mending. The intention could be earnest. The wages attached to such labour were often dishearteningly low. You can feel the gap between moral expectation and economic reality without anyone needing to say it aloud. You begin to notice that religion also provides a language for dignity in places where dignity is constantly being chipped away. A funeral procession through a rough district changes the street for a few minutes. A Sunday dress carefully kept offers a person a different version of selfhood for an hour. A church pew gives equal seating to people whom the rest of the week arranges unequally. Not perfectly equal, of course. Cities rarely permit perfection in any form. But the ritual matters. It tells people that their lives fit into a larger story than rent, wages, vice and fatigue. Still, the debate never fully quiets. Were reformers truly helping or trying to discipline the poor into middle-class respectability? Were rescue homes refuges, or holding pens for women expected to exchange one form of control for another? Did missions reduce suffering in practical ways, or did they mainly ease the conscience of the respectable? The answer changes according to the institution, the city, and the person entering the door. What seems clear is that these places mattered not because they solved urban vice, but because they became part of how the city explained itself to itself. You leave the mission and step back into the street where the cold feels sharper after the stove's warmth. The district is still alive, still trading in appetite and endurance. Yet now you notice the quieter motions too. A woman carrying a parcel from a church charity room. A child in shoes clearly handed down through several acts of mercy. A man pausing outside the mission door deciding whether pride or hunger will win tonight. Religion here is not floating above the city. It is entangled in it, kneeling in the mud while trying to keep its cuffs clean. And for all its hymns and hopes, even the most devout mission cannot fully banish the district's most stubborn realities. The drains still stink. The privies still overflow. Illness still moves from room to room faster than prayer meetings can keep up. To understand daily life here, you have to follow the smell, the soap, the fever, and the endless struggle to remain even vaguely clean. Once you start paying attention to cleanliness in a 19th century sin city, you can never quite stop. The illusion of glamour survives only as long as your nose remains politely distracted. But the city is not interested in helping with that. It keeps offering reminders. A gutter that does not quite drain. A stable yard steaming in the morning chill. A wash basin clouded after one quick scrub. The sharp medicinal smell of a patent remedy fighting a battle it may not understand. Even in the most elegant parlour, there is always some hint that the body is harder to manage than the curtains suggest. You notice this first in the streets. Mud remains a constant companion, though by now you're beginning to understand its moods. Fresh rain turns it slick and deep. Dry spells turn everything powdery, and then the dust rises into hems, cuffs, throats, and lungs. Horses contribute generously to the general condition of the roads, as do pigs in some places. Kitchen, refuse, cigar ends, broken straw, and whatever else a crowded city chooses not to discuss in public. Sanitation in many rapidly growing American cities lagged badly behind population growth during the 19th century. That is one of the clearest realities of urban life in the period. Sewers were incomplete drains, unreliable garbage removal uneven, and privies overworked to the point of public insult. You walk behind a row of buildings and find the real anatomy of the neighbourhood. Barrels, wash lines, a leaning privy, water thrown from an upstairs window with only the briefest warning. A boy carrying slops with the stoicism of a child already far too familiar with adult inconvenience. This is where the district stops pretending. The bright front rooms may sell pleasure company and chance, but the back spaces are devoted to the far less glamorous business of keeping life going in close quarters. Inside boarding houses and cheap hotels, the battle against dirt is constant and never fully won. Floors are swept, yes, but they cannot stay clean for long. Bedding is aired when possible, though the word aired covers a large moral territory. Towels are shared more often than anyone would prefer. Water must be hauled, heated, poured, reused, and regretted. In wealthier homes, bathing can be a planned domestic event with proper tubs and privacy. In poorer lodgings, washing is often partial, hurried, and focused on the visible areas first. Face, hands, collar, cuffs. Respectability begins at the edges. You begin to admire the sheer determination involved in looking presentable under these conditions. A woman in a neat bodice, a man with polished boots, a child with freshly combed hair, all are small triumphs over an environment that seems actively opposed to neatness. Soap matters, starch matters, boiling water matters, so does timing. Wash too early and the street ruins you before noon. Wash too late and the basin is already cold, the house crowded, the energy gone. Laundries become newly impressive once you understand what they are fighting. Shirts, sheets, aprons, stockings, and dresses pass through water soap, lie scrubbing boards, wringing hands, steam starch, and irons heavy enough to count as character-building equipment. Clean linen was not merely a luxury, it was a sign of effort, health, and self-command. No wonder so many city dwellers spent precious income on laundering or did the work themselves with almost fierce discipline. Medical ideas about cleanliness were changing during the 19th century, though not always evenly or consistently. People did not yet share a fully modern understanding of germs, but they certainly recognized that foul air, stagnant water, crowded housing and filth were tied to sickness. Cholera, typhoid, influenza, tuberculosis, and other illnesses moved readily through dense neighborhoods. Epidemics visited American cities with alarming regularity, and poorer districts often suffered worst because they had the least space, the weakest infrastructure, and the fewest protections. A fever in one room could become several fevers in a week. The smell of sickness is different from the smell of dirt. You notice that too. Camphor, vinegar, damp cloths, burned herbs, the stale air of a room where windows stay shut against weather or fear. Families and boarding house residents did what they could. Windows opened when weather allowed, bedding was shaken, floors scrubbed, tonics were bought, advice was exchanged. Some of that advice helped. Some of it merely occupied the hands while nature decided. People reached for mustard plasters, quinine castor oil, patent syrups, and a wild assortment of advertised cures, many of them sold with unshakable confidence and uncertain results. One curious feature of the era's health culture is the popularity of patent medicines whose labels promised relief for nearly everything short of bad relatives. These bottles often contained alcohol, opiates, or other potent ingredients, which meant they sometimes did make a person feel different, though not always in the manner the advertising intended. In vice districts where regular medical care could be expensive, judgmental, or difficult to access, such remedies circulated widely. A bright label and a persuasive claim could carry a great deal of hope. You see the pressure of hygiene most clearly in places tied to female labour. Brothels, dance halls, boarding houses, and laundries all depend on surfaces. Clean sheets, fresh collars, brushed hair, decent-smelling rooms, polished glass, wiped tables. The labour behind that appearance is relentless. Somebody is always scrubbing, rinsing, folding, airing, sweeping, emptying, and pretending not to notice what cannot truly be erased. The city's nightlife may shimmer at the front, but behind every respectable parlour and seductive room is a basin, a broom, and a woman who is tired of carrying both. The same goes for food. Kitchens must manage heats, storage waste, and pests in conditions that would test the faith of a saint. Meat can spoil, milk can turn, water can disappoint you on a philosophical level. Street vendors, saloon cooks, boarding house matrons, and hotel kitchens all work within these risks. Some do so skillfully, others do so with a degree of optimism that you, from the comfort of modern refrigeration, may find heroic or horrifying. Probably both. There remains lively disagreement among historians about how strongly contemporaries connected urban disease to infrastructure failures versus moral explanations about drink vice and personal habits. Reformers often blended the two, treating filth as both a public problem and a moral symbol. Yet residents themselves frequently understood the material causes very well. They knew which well tasted wrong, which alley flooded, which privy backed up after rain, which lodging house breathed sickness in winter. People without power are often still excellent observers of the forces harming them. A small but memorable detail from urban housekeeping is the widespread use of sachets, colognes, hair pomades, vinegar rinses, and scented waters to improve both bodies and rooms. Fragrance was not always vanity. Often it was strategy. Perfume could soften the edge of stale curtains. Lavender in a trunk could make linen seem fresher than circumstances justified. A dab of cologne before evening work could offer the difference between fatigue and presentation. Smell like clothing was managed in layers. You begin to understand why cleanliness carried such moral and social meaning. To be neat in a dirty city was to signal discipline. To smell fresh in a crowded room was to claim some control over your own life. To keep a child's face washed, a dress mended, a collar white, or a room swept was not trivial. It was resistance against decay, against judgment, against the city steady attempt to rub everyone down to the same dusty, weary finish. And still, people got sick. Rooms went stale, outbreaks came, a cough lingered. A fever returned, a doctor arrived late or not at all. A woman kept working because rent waited for no convalescence. A man drank a tonic and called it recovery because he had a shift in the morning. Everyday life in these neighbourhoods was not simply dirty. It was a continuous negotiation with bodily fragility. By late afternoon you notice the district refreshing itself for evening. Buckets are emptied. Floors are swept again. Hair is arranged. Faces are washed. Jackets are brushed. Lamps are trimmed. Even the street for a few minutes looks almost composed. The city knows how to prepare its surfaces. It has had practice. Soon the brighter lights will return, and with them all the little signs of aspiration people pin onto themselves in the hope of being seen favourably. Because after you have scrubbed, aired, ironed, mended, and survived, you begin to crave something more than mere cleanliness. You want beauty, or at least the impression of it. You want a ribbon, a polished watch chain, a better pair of gloves, a hat that sits just right. In a city that wears people down so efficiently, the urge for little luxuries becomes not foolish at all, but deeply understandable. After all the scrubbing, rinsing, and quiet battles against dirt, the desire for something finer begins to make perfect sense. You feel it yourself as you pass a shop window where goods are arranged with care that borders on reverence. A ribbon placed just so, a pair of gloves folded neatly, a hat angled to suggest confidence rather than cost. These are not grand luxuries, not for most people here, but they are glimpses of another version of life, one that feels smoother, more controlled, less subject to the constant negotiation with mud and fatigue. You step inside one of the smaller shops, drawn by the soft rustle of fabric and the promise of order. The space is narrow but tidy, every inch used wisely. Shelves hold bolts of cloth in muted and bright tones. A counter displays buttons, pins, combs, and small decorative items that can transform an outfit without transforming a budget. Behind the counter, a woman measures fabric with practiced efficiency, her hands moving quickly, her eyes assessing both material and customer in the same glance. Shopping in these districts is rarely about indulgence. It is about strategy. You buy what you need when you can, and you choose carefully. A new collar might make an old shirt presentable. A ribbon can refresh a dress that has already lived several lives. A polished pair of boots might help secure employment, or at least maintain dignity in a place where appearances are read as signals of reliability. Even the smallest purchase carries weight. In the 19th century, urban markets expanded rapidly, offering a wider range of goods than many people had ever seen before. Department stores began to emerge in larger cities, though in districts like this smaller shops and street vendors remained more common. Goods arrived through growing transportation networks, bringing fabrics, tools, household items, and imported curiosities into neighborhoods that might otherwise feel isolated. The availability of these items did not mean they were easily affordable, but their presence alone could shape aspirations. You notice how people browse even when they cannot buy. A man pauses at a display of watches, studying them as if memorizing their details. A woman runs her fingers lightly over a length of fabric, then withdraws her hand with a small, controlled motion. A child presses close to the glass eyes, fixed on something bright and unreachable. The act of looking becomes part of the experience, a way of participating in a world that may remain just out of reach. Clothing in particular holds a special place in this environment. It is both necessity and expression. You see garments that have been altered, repaired, and adjusted with remarkable ingenuity. Sleeves let out hems, taken up collars, replaced patches sewn so neatly they almost pass for decoration. Tailors and dressmakers play a crucial role here, extending the life of clothing and helping people maintain a sense of self-presentation despite limited means. One interesting practice from the period is the renting or borrowing of certain items for special occasions. A finer coat, a better hat, a piece of jewellery. Not everyone could own such things, but for a night or an event they could be worn, allowing the wearer to step briefly into a different social position. It is a reminder that identity in these cities can be flexible, shaped not only by circumstance, but by what you choose or manage to put on. You move past a stall selling small personal items. Combs, hairpins, mirrors, bottles of scent. These are the tools of daily transformation. A quick adjustment of hair, a dab of fragrance, a glance in a mirror, and a person can shift how they are perceived, if only slightly. In a crowded environment where first impressions matter, these small acts carry significance. There is also a trade in second-hand goods that thrives quietly alongside the new. Shops and street vendors offer clothing, furniture, and household items that have passed through several owners. Some pieces show their history openly. Others have been cleaned and repaired to the point where their past is less obvious. Buying second-hand is not simply a matter of economy. It is part of the city's cycle of reuse, a way of keeping goods in motion and extending their usefulness. Observers of the time sometimes remarked on the growing importance of consumer culture in urban life, though they did not always agree on its effects. Some saw it as a sign of progress, offering people more choice and comfort. Others worried that it encouraged vanity, debt, and dissatisfaction. Walking through these streets, you can see both perspectives at once. The availability of goods provides opportunity, but it also highlights the gap between what people have and what they might wish to have. You notice how certain items become markers of status within the district. A well-cut coat, a clean pair of gloves, a hat that fits just right. These signals are read quickly, influencing how others respond. A person who appears put together may receive better treatment, more trust, more opportunities. It is not always fair, but it's consistent enough to shape behaviour. A small detail catches your attention. A man carefully polishing his boots outside a shop using a cloth that has clearly seen many such sessions. The care he takes is deliberate, almost meditative. When he finishes, he stands, adjusts his coat, and walks away with a slightly different posture. The boots have not changed his circumstances, but they have changed how he carries himself, and that matters. You pass a vendor selling inexpensive jewellery, the pieces catching the light in a way that suggests more value than they likely hold. A young woman examines a pair of earrings, her expression thoughtful. She turns them in her hand, considering. After a moment she sets them down and moves on. The decision is small, but it reflects a larger pattern. Choices are weighed carefully here. Every coin has multiple potential uses, and each purchase must justify itself. The city's marketplaces also serve as social spaces. People meet, talk, exchange information, and observe one another. A shop can be a place of conversation as much as commerce. News travels quickly through these interactions, spreading from one person to another, shaping how the district understands itself. As the day begins to lean toward evening again, you notice the subtle shift in preparation. People who can afford it make small adjustments. A fresh collar, a brushed coat, a ribbon tied differently. These changes signal readiness for the night for whatever it may bring. The same streets that hosted labour and survival during the day now begin to hint at leisure at display at the possibility of being seen in a different light. You realise that these small luxuries, these careful choices are not trivial. They are part of how people maintain identity in a place that can easily erode it. They offer moments of control, of expression, of aspiration. In a city that demands so much, even a ribbon or a polished boot can feel like a victory. And as the lamps begin to glow once more, reflecting off glass and metal and fabric, the district prepares to shift again. Beyond the shops, beyond the stalls, other forms of entertainment are already gathering their audiences ready to offer distraction, excitement, and perhaps a brief escape from the routines that define the day. By evening, the city has fully changed its clothes. The shops still glow, but now they are part of a larger invitation. The streets no longer belong mainly to work errands and practical exchanges. They begin to belong to spectacle. Not only vice, although vice is certainly still doing its usual energetic business. There is something broader happening too. The city wants to entertain itself. It wants noise-colour surprise, and the pleasant temporary feeling that daily strain has loosened its grip. You can sense it in the crowd. People are moving with less urgency now, more willing to pause, to watch, to be drawn in. This is where the old reputation of the Sin City can be misleading in a different way. It encourages you to imagine that every evening ends in a saloon, a gambling room or a brothel. But urban nights in the 19th century also offered theatres, minstrel and variety performances, circuses when they came through parades, cheap museums, public lectures, music halls, sporting contests, and small amusements sold for only a few coins. Entertainment stretched well beyond vice, even when the same district housed both. A notorious neighbourhood could still contain a perfectly ordinary family, heading to a show, a clerk spending his one free evening at the theatre, or a group of girls buying sweets and watching the crowd with keen attention. You follow the flow toward a theatre whose facade is ambitious enough to suggest refinement, though the street outside refuses to cooperate fully. Carriages arrive. Boots pick around puddles. A poster advertises melodrama comedy, or perhaps a touring actress whose fame has reached this city ahead of her luggage. The audience gathering at the entrance is mixed. Better coats near the front, rougher jackets at the edges, women in shawls, young men trying to look sophisticated, older couples who have clearly decided that culture is worth navigating a muddy street for. The theatre promises a more respectable kind of excitement, which is one of the great urban bargains. You may still be in a rough district, but for a few hours you can sit in the dark and let somebody else make a fool of themselves on purpose. The growth of commercial entertainment was one of the major developments of 19th century city life. Expanding populations and transport networks made it possible for peer performers, circuses, lecturers, and theatrical companies to reach larger audiences. Urban residents increasingly had places to spend leisure time outside home and church, and those choices mattered. They shaped how people relaxed, flirted, learned, argued, and imagined the wider world. A city that could support vice could also support tickets programs, stage scenery, and penny amusements. In fact, those worlds often overlapped in fascinating ways. You move on before the curtain rises because the street itself is proving almost as interesting as any stage. A man with a tray sells roasted nuts. Another offers handbills. A boy demonstrates a toy that spins and whistles with enough persistence to alarm any peace-loving adult. A cluster of people gathers around a street musician whose violin is not perfect, but whose confidence is extraordinary. Nearby, someone advertises a lecture on science or morality or travel, which in this city may all qualify as evening entertainment depending on how tired you are and how warm the hall is. Then there are the sporting pleasures, prize-fighting foot races, rowing matches, horse racing, and various feats of strength or endurance drew eager crowds in different cities and decades even when officials pretended otherwise. Men especially could turn almost any contest into an occasion. You only need a few wagers, a patch of open ground, and two people willing to prove something. Sometimes the spectacle is formal with tickets and promotion. Sometimes it is little more than a crowd forming itself around an argument. Either way, people gather because competition offers the same thing theatre does: suspense identity and the chance to cheer for somebody who is not you. One curious detail from the era is the popularity of dime museums and similar attractions in some cities where visitors could pay a small fee to see oddities, curiosities, wax figures, mechanical wonders, or human performers presented as marvels from the edges of the world. These places could mix education and nonsense with admirable efficiency. A person might enter hoping for enlightenment and leave having seen a stuffed animal, a historical tableau, and a man swallowing swords all under one roof. Urban entertainment was not always refined, but it was rarely dull. You pass one such establishment or something close to it, marked by posters promising wonders inside. The language is breathless, extraordinary, astonishing, never before witnessed. It is the language of modern advertising in a very recognizable early costume. People want novelty, and the city has learned to package it. In a district already crowded with claims, novelty becomes a kind of currency. Whoever can surprise the public gets their coins. Not everyone approves naturally. Moralists worried that cheap amusements distracted workers, corrupted youth, encouraged idleness, or lured respectable people too near the rougher edges of urban life. Others argued that such entertainments offered harmless release, especially compared with heavier drinking or more dangerous forms of nightlife. There has never been complete agreement over whether these leisure spaces softened the city's harsher tendencies or simply gave them new costumes. Perhaps they did both. A theatre might elevate public taste one evening and host rowdy behaviour the next. A parade might foster civic pride while also encouraging plenty of drinking before sunset. You notice that women and families appear more often in these entertainment spaces than in the deeper drinking rooms. That matters. A music hall, a public concert, a fairground attraction, or a holiday parade could create mixed crowds where behaviour adjusted itself at least slightly under broader social scrutiny. Children stare at posters, mothers hush them, young couples move through the press of bodies trying to appear casual about being together. Elderly spectators take seats with the air of people who have paid for amusement and intend to receive it in full. The district for a while broadens its personality. A smaller but revealing feature of city entertainment is the role of refreshments. Candy oysters, peanuts, lemonade, beer pies, coffee, chestnuts, depending on the place and season. People rarely watch anything for long without wanting to nibble, sip, or complain about prices. Food follows leisure, just as faithfully as vice follows wages. Even delight, it seems, prefers a snack. As you walk farther, you come upon a parade route, or perhaps only the remains of one marked by scraps of paper hoofprints and excited recollections. Public parades in 19th century cities could be lavish or improvised, political or festive, ethnic or civic, military or comic. They gave neighbourhoods a chance to display themselves to themselves. Bands, banners, uniforms, trade floats, fire companies, benevolent societies, immigrant groups, clubs, veterans all could take part. The city loved to watch itself march by. It was one of the few times chaos arranged itself into a visible line. Some historians suggest that these entertainments helped create a shared urban culture among very different residents, while others point out that audiences remained sharply divided by class, ethnicity, language, and neighbourhood. Both ideas ring true as you look around. A crowd may gather in one place, but people do not all gather in the same way. Some buy the best seats, some stand at the back, some laugh freely, some watch more cautiously, some can afford leisure often, others have only this one evening. The city unites people and sorts them at the same time. Still, there is pleasure here that is not reducible to vice, genuine pleasure, laughter at a comic line, wonder at a performer's skill, delight in brass instruments echoing off brick, a child's face lit by painted scenery, a tired seamstress forgetting her own hands for an hour while listening to a soprano, a dock worker cheering a race with complete moral seriousness. These things matter. They make urban life more than endurance. You realise too that entertainment offers a kind of rehearsal for modern city living. It teaches people to share space with strangers, to read crowds, to buy tickets, to follow schedules, to choose among amusements, to become audiences, as well as workers. The Sin City is not just a place of appetite. It is a school for mass culture, noisy and imperfect, and more influential than it looks. By the time the streets begin to thin again, you are carrying a richer sense of the neighbourhood. Not merely wicked, not merely weary, but inventive in its pursuit of diversion. It sells pleasure in many forms, some tender, some ridiculous, some exploitative, some genuinely joyful. And when the performances end and the crowd scatters homeward, you begin to see what matters even more. Behind all these entertainments, behind the music and spectacle, there are homes trying to function. Marriages, children laundry scoldings, bedtime prayers, unpaid bills, patched blankets. Family life has not vanished from these districts. It has simply learned to live beside all the noise. When the crowds thin and the brighter doors begin to close, the district does not go quiet so much as turn inward. The public city withdraws a little, and the private one starts to show through the cracks. Upstairs windows glow softly. A woman shakes out a cloth over a railing. Somewhere a child protests bedtime with the full moral force of a much smaller person who believes sleep is tyranny. A man coughs behind a wall. A kettle is moved from stove to table. This is the part of the neighbourhood later legends usually skip because family life is less dramatic than vice. But family life is here all the same, pressed into rooms above shops, behind saloons, beside boarding houses, and inside narrow homes trying to remain homes in places designed to test the definition. You begin to notice how many signs of domesticity have been present all along. Tiny shoes drying by a door, a cradle near a kitchen wall, school slates propped beside a bucket, women buying flour and soap in quantities that suggest ordinary planning rather than wild abandon, men carrying parcels of meat or coal with the sheepish seriousness of those who know they have promised to bring something home and would prefer not to arrive empty-handed. Even in districts known for gambling, prostitution and drink, people still marry, quarrel, nurse babies, celebrate birthdays and worry about winter blankets. The city may market itself through spectacle, but it is sustained by routines. This matters historically because many 19th century vice districts were not sealed entertainment zones in the modern sense. They were mixed neighbourhoods. Families lived among businesses, labourers rented rooms near dance halls. Widows took in boarders above saloons, and children grew up hearing music from the street below. Urban land was too valuable, housing too scarce, and class boundaries too porous for every activity to occupy its own tidy box. Moral reformers liked sharp distinctions. Real city blocks offered fewer. You walk past a house where a lamp burns low into the front room. Through the curtain you glimpse a table, 3 chairs and a woman darning something small while a child sleeps across 2 seats pushed together. It is not picturesque, it is practical. Space is limited furniture, mismatched privacy, almost theoretical, yet the scene has its own steadiness. Home in these neighbourhoods is often less about comfort than about repetition. The same cup, the same corner, the same shawl over the same chair each night. Familiarity becomes a form of shelter. Children grow up quickly here, though, not always unhappily. They run errands, mind younger siblings, carry messages, fetch water and learn which streets belong to which moods. They also play. That is the saving complication. Even in rough districts, childhood keeps inserting itself. Chalk marks on a boardwalk, a stick rolled through the mud as if it were a carriage, a rag doll tucked into a window seat, a game shouted in the alley until some adult with a headache insists that enough is enough. Vice districts did not erase childhood, they complicated it. Some reformers wrote as if any child raised near saloons or brothels must inevitably be ruined by atmosphere alone. Others, and many residents themselves, understood the picture to be more mixed. Environment matters, certainly. So do wages, schooling, family stability, health, and neighbourhood ties. Children in these districts could be exposed to adult realities earlier than their middle-class counterparts, but they were also often surrounded by extended networks of care, gossip, correction, and mutual watching. A landlady might scold a boy as sharply as his aunt. A shopkeeper might keep an eye on a girl walking home at dusk. Urban family life relied heavily on this kind of informal supervision. One small but telling feature of the period is the importance of shared domestic labour among children. Older daughters especially might help with laundry, cooking, sewing and sibling care at very young ages, while boys contributed through errands, paid work or hauling fuel and water. Childhood was not arranged around self-expression. It was arranged around usefulness, with play fitted in where possible like sunlight through narrow streets. That may sound harsh, and sometimes it was, but usefulness also gave children belonging. In crowded homes, everyone had a part. Marriage too looks different here than in sentimental paintings. It is less a soft union of souls and more a daily negotiation between affection, money, fatigue, and whatever the city has thrown at the household this week. Some couples are tender in quiet ways. A hand on a shoulder, a shared joke over weak tea, a man walking the baby because his wife has been on her feet since dawn. Others are bound more by necessity than romance. A rent paid together is still a form of partnership, even if the poetry is in poor condition. And of course, some marriages are strained by drink, violence, unemployment, jealousy, or the brutal shrinking of patience that comes with chronic hardship. Widowhood is everywhere in urban America of this period, and it reshapes family life profoundly. A widow may keep a home going by taking in washing, sewing, for neighbours renting a room or remarrying with more practicality than delight. She may become the financial centre of the household while still being treated publicly as fragile or dependent. In truth, many urban families survived because women could stretch money, improvise meals, repair clothing, and absorb shock after shock without announcing themselves heroic. History often notices the flamboyant madam and forgets the woman quietly turning one roasted chicken into 3 meals and a broth. You can hear family life in the sounds. A baby fussing while music from the street goes on as if the two belong naturally together. A father practicing sums with a child at the table. A mother calling someone in from the alley before the lamps burn too low. Sisters arguing over a comb. Somebody laughing through a wall at a story too ordinary ever to become legend. This is what makes the district feel deeply human rather than merely notorious. It contains people who are not performing for customers or reformers or newspapers. They are simply trying to keep a household stitched together. There is still debate among historians about whether family residence in vice districts reflected desperate last resort practical convenience or a more normal pattern of mixed urban use than later accounts admitted. All three likely played a part. Some families had no better options. Others lived near work because that made sense. Some neighbourhoods shifted block by block, one street rougher the next, more settled. Cities rarely hold still long enough to be described with a single neat sentence. A detail that lingers with you is how households manage sleeping arrangements. In cramped rooms, beds were shared, cots folded away, children tucked into corners and parlours converted into nighttime sleeping space once the day's chairs were pushed aside. Privacy between generations could be minimal. This did not mean families lacked modesty or boundaries. It meant boundaries had to be constructed through habits rather than architecture. Averted eyes, timed errands, whispered conversations after the children slept, blankets hung creatively. Domestic dignity can be very inventive when square footage is cruel. The home economies of these districts are relentless. Soap must be bought, candles stretched, rent negotiated, food preserved if possible and eaten if not, clothing mended again, a child's shoes passed down, a husband's wages hidden from his own weaker impulses, a daughter's reputation guarded, a sick relative accommodated somehow. The arithmetic is exhausting. Yet these households are not only scenes of strain, they also contain humour, ritual and tenderness. Sunday clothes brushed carefully, special cakes on holidays, Songs sung while ironing, hair braided at the end of a long day, a father carving toys from scrap wood if he has the patience and the hands for it. You begin to understand that family life in a sin city is not an exception to the story. It is one of the story's central truths. The Vice District is not populated only by drifters and customers. It contains residents' generations, obligations, histories. A child born above a dance hall may grow up to become a clerk, a laundress, a teacher, a bartender, a wife, a union man, a preacher, a performer, or simply another adult who remembers that the street below never entirely slept. The family absorbs the city and the city marks the family in return. As the night settles deeper, windows darken one by one. The last errands end. The babies sleep. The arguments soften or sharpen depending on the household. Somewhere nearby, a woman still waits for her husband, not yet home. Somewhere else, a man climbs the stairs with bread under one arm and apology in the other. These are not the scenes most people remember when they picture the America's sin cities in the 1800s, but they may be the most important. Because without families, routines and homes, however fragile the district would be only a marketplace. It becomes a neighborhood because people keep living here after the customers leave. And yet neighborhoods do not remain fixed forever. Pressures build, reformers gather strength, property values shift, newspapers find fresh outrage. Investors start imagining cleaner streets and more profitable respectability. The city that once tolerated vice so comfortably is beginning in places to plan a makeover. Change does not arrive all at once. It creeps and tests the edges and then gathers confidence. You begin to sense it in the conversations first. A man at the corner mentions new regulations. A shopkeeper complains about rising rents. A landlady mutters about inspectors asking questions that no one used to ask. The city, which once seemed content to let things run on their own rough logic, is starting to look at itself more critically, or at least more profitably. You walk down a familiar street and notice something subtle but important. A building has been repaired. Another has been repainted. A sign has been removed. These are small adjustments, but they carry meaning. They suggest that someone somewhere is imagining a different future for this place. Not necessarily a kinder one, but a more controlled one. Vice districts, like all parts of a growing city, are subject to change when money, politics, and public opinion begin to align. By the late 19th century, many American cities were experiencing waves of reform aimed at cleaning up neighborhoods associated with gambling, prostitution, and heavy drinking. These efforts were driven by a mix of moral conviction, public health concerns, and economic interests. Cleaner streets, safer environments, and more respectable reputations could attract investment and a middle-class residents. At the same time, reform movements often reflected anxieties about immigration, urban growth, and shifting social norms. You see the tension in the way people respond. Some welcome the changes. A mother hopes for quieter nights, fewer disturbances, a safer path for her children. A shopkeeper imagines more customers who can pay regularly. A church group sees an opportunity to extend its influence. Others are wary. A bartender wonders if his livelihood will survive. A woman working in a dance hall calculates how long she can stay before the pressure becomes too strong. A landlord considers whether higher rents might follow any improvement and whether his current tenants will still be able to afford them. The process is uneven. One block may be targeted for reform while the next continues as before. Authorities may close a gambling room only to see another open a few streets away. Prostitution may be pushed out of one district and into another less visible area. The city does not eliminate these activities so much as redistribute them, shifting the balance without fully resolving the underlying conditions that sustain them. There is also the matter of enforcement, which remains as selective as ever. A raid may occur with great publicity followed by a period of quiet. New rules may be announced, then applied inconsistently. The appearance of progress can be as important as the reality, especially when newspapers and public opinion are involved. You begin to understand that reform is not a single event, but an ongoing negotiation shaped by competing interests and limited resources. One detail that stands out is the role of property owners in these changes. As land values rise, the incentive to transform a district grows stronger. Buildings that once housed boarding houses or small businesses may be renovated or replaced. Streets may be improved. Infrastructure may be upgraded. These changes can bring benefits, but they also displace residents who can no longer afford to stay. The city evolves, but not always in ways that include everyone who helped build it. You pass a familiar establishment and find it closed its windows dark, its sign removed. In its place, a new business is preparing to open something more respectable, or at least more acceptable to those pushing for change. The transition feels abrupt, yet it is the result of many small pressures building over time. Economic shifts, legal actions, social campaigns all converging to reshape the landscape. Observers of the period often debated whether these reforms truly improved urban life or simply masked deeper inequalities. Some argued that reducing visible vice made cities healthier and more stable. Others pointed out that without addressing poverty, labour conditions and housing shortages, such efforts could only go so far. The debate continues because the outcomes were mixed. Some neighbourhoods did become safer and more orderly. Others saw problems move elsewhere out of sight but not out of existence. You notice how residents adapt. Those who remain find new ways to navigate the changing environment. A former dance hall worker may shift to a different form of employment. A saloon may alter its services to comply with new regulations. Families adjust their routines as the neighbourhood evolves. Adaptation is a constant theme in these cities. People learn to move with the changes even when they are not entirely welcome. There is also a sense of loss, though it is not always spoken aloud. The district, for all its flaws, had a certain character, a liveliness that came from its mix of people and activities. As reform takes hold, some of that energy fades. The streets may become quieter, cleaner, more predictable. For some this is a relief. For others, it feels like the end of something unique, something that cannot be easily replaced. A small but telling observation is how quickly new narratives form around these changes. What was once condemned as a den of vice may later be remembered with a certain nostalgia. Stories soften, edges blur. The past becomes a place of colour and excitement, even if the reality was far more complicated. Memory, like the city itself, is selective. You continue walking, noticing the contrast more clearly now. Old and new, vice and reform, continuity and change. The district is not static. It is in motion, shaped by forces both internal and external. The people who live and work here are part of that motion, their lives intertwined with this broader evolution of the city. As the night deepens, you sense that this process will continue long after you leave. The buildings may change. The businesses may shift, the population may turn over, but the underlying patterns, the balance between opportunity and risk, between freedom and constraint, will persist in new forms. You pause at the edge of the district, looking back at the streets you have walked. The lights are still there, though perhaps fewer than before. The sounds are softer, though still present. The city has not lost its energy, it has simply begun to redirect it. And as you turn away, you carry with you a clearer understanding of what this place has been. Not just a collection of vices, but a living, changing environment where people have worked, struggled, adapted, and found ways to make a life within the limits and possibilities of their time. You find yourself walking more slowly now, not because the streets have changed, but because your understanding of them has. What once felt like a spectacle now feels like a system. The lights, the noise, the movement, all of it still surrounds you, but it no longer appears as a simple story of indulgence and excess. Instead, it reveals itself as something far more intricate, built from necessity as much as desire, from routine as much as risk. The night continues, though it is quieter now. The loudest laughter has softened. The busiest doors have begun to close. A few figures still move with purpose, finishing shifts, returning home, or seeking one last transaction before morning. You pass a saloon where the final patrons linger, their voices lower, their gestures slower. The energy of earlier hours has drained into something more reflective, or perhaps simply more tired. It becomes clear that the idea of constant excitement in these cities is an illusion. Most of life here is not dramatic. It is repetitive, demanding, and often mundane. The extraordinary moments, the ones that later stories celebrate, are only a small part of the daily experience. What defines this place is not a single night of excess, but the steady rhythm of work survival and adaptation that carries people from one day to the next. You think back to everything you've seen, the boarding houses with their thin walls and shared spaces, the early morning meals that fuel long hours of labour, the women navigating the streets with careful awareness, the men performing confidence even when it wavers, the saloons that serve as both refuge and risk, the dance halls where effort hides behind elegance, the gambling rooms where chance and control intertwine, the brothels where intimacy becomes transaction, the missions offering aid and expectation, the streets where cleanliness is a constant struggle, the shops where small purchases carry meaning, the entertainments that provide brief escape, the families holding everything together behind closed doors, the slow uneven changes reshaping the district. All of it fits together not neatly but persistently. Each part depends on the others. Remove one and the balance shifts. The city is not defined by any single element. It is defined by the way those elements interact, overlap, and sometimes collide. There is a tendency when looking back at places like this to simplify them, to reduce them to symbols of vice or progress, danger or opportunity. But standing here, you can see that such simplifications miss the point. These cities were lived in by real people, each with their own concerns, hopes and limits. Their experiences were not uniform. Some found success, others struggled. Many simply endured finding ways to navigate a complex environment with whatever resources they had. Accounts from the period often emphasize the extremes, the most shocking or sensational aspects of urban life. That is understandable. Those stories capture attention. They make for compelling reading, but they do not capture the full picture. The quieter details, the everyday routines, the small decisions, these are what truly shaped life in these places. They determined who stayed, who left, who adapted, and who could not. You pause near a corner where a single lamp casts a steady glow. A man passes, nodding briefly. A woman adjusts her shawl and continues on her way. A child's laughter echoes faintly from somewhere above. These are not dramatic moments, but they are real. They are the fabric of the city, woven from countless small actions and interactions. There has been ongoing discussion among historians about how to interpret these environments. Some emphasize the role of vice and its impact on individuals and communities. Others focus on the economic and social structures that have made such districts possible. Still others look at the ways people exercised agency within constrained circumstances. Each perspective adds something, but none fully captures the complexity on its own. The truth lies in the combination, in the recognition that these cities were shaped by multiple forces at once. A small detail comes to mind, something you noticed earlier, but did not fully consider at the time. The way people moved through the streets, adjusting their pace, their posture, their expressions, depending on where they were and who was around. It was not random, it was learned behaviour, a response to the environment. Over time it becomes second nature. You adapt without thinking, becoming part of the system even as you navigate it. This adaptability is perhaps the most striking feature of life here. People do not simply endure the city, they engage with it, respond to it, reshape it in small ways. A shopkeeper changes his offerings, a worker finds a better route, a family rearranges their living space. A performer refines her act, a reformer adjusts his approach. These changes may seem minor, but collectively they influence the direction of the city. As the night continues to wind down, you feel a sense of completion, though not in the sense of an ending. The city will wake again in a few hours. The same routines will resume. The same challenges will appear. The same opportunities will tempt. What you have seen is not a single story with a clear conclusion, but a cycle repeating and evolving over time. You take one last look at the street, now quieter, but still alive. The lamps flicker slightly, the shadows stretch, the air carries a mix of lingering smells softened by the cooler night. It is not beautiful in a conventional sense, but it is real, and there is something compelling in that honesty. Now, as you begin to step away, the pace slows. The sounds fade just a little. The edges of the scene soften. You can let the details blur the sharper contrasts, easing into something gentler. You picture the city at rest, or as close to rest as it ever comes. Doors closed, lamps dimmed, voices lowered. The people inside their rooms, in their beds, in their shared spaces, breathing, sleeping, recovering. The streets emptying, the mud settling, the air cooling. The constant motion pausing, if only briefly. You do not need to hold on to every detail. Let them drift. The lights, the sounds, the faces all can fade into a quieter impression. What remains is the sense of a place that lived fully with all its contradictions, its struggles, its small victories. And as you let that image settle, you can allow your thoughts to slow as well. There is no need to analyze further, no need to follow every thread. The story has been told not in a single line, but in many overlapping ones. The city rests, and you can too. Sweet dreams.